Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Luffy and D Clan Were Superhumans. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. A boy sat inside the crow's nest with a pout. Young eyes watched the flag that stood just above his head displaying ASL proudly. Raven locks dancing along with the wind. Nah, I'm bored, Luffy whined. It wasn't that long ago that he was playing with his older brother, Ace, inside their treehouse. That is, until Ace had another narcolepsy attack and was now snoring away on the floor. Luffy tried to entertain himself with drawing, scavenging a few fruit here and there, before scaling up to their crow's nest. He really wished that he could fly, thinking back to when he first saw Ace fly. Amazed by the quick movements, Luffy and Sabo watched him from the cliff. Luffy marveled at Ace's wings, how the light had hit the black scales, displaying specks of orange, and when cutting into the surface of the waves they looked as if they were sparkling. As soon he had landed, Luffy announced how cool and pretty he was. The comment had caused Sabo to laugh, only to be hit by a blushing Ace. Luffy raised his fists in the air as he yelled "Me next" and leapt off the cliff, leaving his two brothers with their jaws dropped. Ace had managed to save him, though he received a hit to the head and was told how he was an idiot for doing that. It only made him cry even more, and Ace yelled to stop being a crybaby. Sabo stepped in, whacking Ace, and explained to Luffy that he was still too young to fly. Luffy whined, saying that he wanted to fly. They promised that if he wanted to fly, all he had to do is ask Ace for a ride, but only if he didn't do anything like that again. Luffy agreed instantly, only a bit disappointed that he wouldn't be able to fly anytime soon. He kept to his promise still, not to mention his brother would probably kill him if he tried again. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Luffy scanned the space below him, noticing a lone figure a few branches below. He observed the top-hatted, blue figure for a moment before grinning like a madman. He crouched onto his hands and feet, his nails growing into talons along with a long appendage sprouting from his lower back, partially transformed. Using the better form, he clawed down the tree as quietly as he could. He crawled along a few more branches, hovering over the unsuspecting figure. He inhaled a silent breath before leaping into another boy's lap. Sabo. As Luffy landed, he heard his victim cry from his sudden presence. Luffy giggled innocently while he straddled the body beneath him, watching his brother. Sabo tipped his top hat slightly to give an annoyed glare as he sighed at his little one's tricks. Sabo sat back up, adjusting to the new weight. Luffy, I thought you were playing with Ace. I was. But Ace fell asleep again, Luffy replied gleefully, pointing down at said brother, who was sprawled out inside their treehouse. Sabo observed the figure, breaking out in a fit full of laughter. I take that it is your fine artwork that's on his chest right now, Sabo stated as he stared at the bright colors that displayed on Ace's chest of multiple doodles. Turning to the culprit, Luffy smiled innocently. It's all right. Want me to read you a story? Sabo gestured down at the book that he picked back up. What are you reading? Luffy tilted his head, curiously observing the book, not understanding the words decorating each page. I found a book while I was in Goa the other day. It's about dragons. The blonde then pointed to the said book. Immediately, Luffy perked up at the mention of dragons and looked eagerly. Right under Sabo's finger was a picture displaying a dragon that had blue scales along its whole body, yellow horns and talons. But what fascinated Luffy the most were the wings that spread themselves to the side, showing how large they were. He reached out to the picture, tracing one of the wings with his finger, and as he reached the tip he looked back up. You said that there weren't any books on us, Luffy said, confusion plastering his face. Sabo just chuckled at the boy's expression before ruffling the raven locks with his hand. There aren't. This book is fictional. Fictional? He raised a brow. It means it's not real. Sabo scratched the side of his head. But we are real. Dragons are real. Me and Ace are real. That book is lying, Luffy exclaimed. Yes, Luffy, dragons are real and I know that. The book isn't lying, it's just a story that someone wrote, Sabo explained to Luffy, who responded with a drawn-out "Oh." Well, it's supposed to be fictional, but it's quite detailed and unusual, so maybe it is true. That's why I wanted to read it. I see, so it's a way to learn about us, he said in realization, leaning closer to look at the book. Sabo nodded, smiling down at him. Want me to read to you? Luffy agreed with excitement, nestling against his brother's chest. Sabo continued to read the book while Luffy sat in his lap, listening to the story. The story was mostly detailed, though vague in some areas such as not mentioning any names or even the size of the dragon. But it was interesting to both of them. It spoke how the dragon soared through the sky, traveling to the most amazing places that were described, how it was so powerful that it was able to fight against giants as one picture displayed. It was only later on through the book that Luffy interrupted his brother. Sabo, what's a dragon bond? Sabo looked to the section that he just read and continued to the end of the page. It's when dragons exchange blood by biting each other on the neck and drinking a small amount of blood, he answered, pointing to his neck. That must hurt. Why do that? They do it to ones that are close to them. It's so they can link themselves together and share each other's feelings. Because they care for each other. It wasn't a question but a statement. Sabo smiled curiously at how his little brother interpreted it. It was a minute later that Luffy was grinning madly at him. The grin made him worry as it meant one of his Luffy ideas. Hey, Sabo, let's do it. What? I want to bond with Ace and Sabo. Why? The word leaving Sabo's mouth without realizing it. Why not? Ace and Sabo are my brothers. Sabo was about to say something but stopped as Luffy continued. Ace gets lonely, you do too. I love Ace and I love Sabo, so I want share my love. So we are never lonely, so I can always have you two with me. Sabo stared down at him, his face showing multiple emotions. Luffy became worried when his face started to change color. Sabo, your face is red. Are you sick? At those words, Sabo shoved Straw Hat down over Luffy's eyes, preventing him to see his blushing cheeks. Luffy struggled, but Sabo refused to move the hat until the color disappeared from his face. Luffy wrestled his hat off, staying in Sabo's hold, then reached forward. Sabo stopped in his movements once he felt rubbery arms embrace him multiple times. Glancing down, he was faced with Luffy beaming up at him, burying his head into his chest. He surrendered and returned the smile with a sigh. You have to ask Ace, said Sabo, placing the straw hat back onto Luffy's raven locks. It wasn't even a second before he watched Luffy spring up from his lap into the treehouse. Sabo, following after him, smirked at Luffy's ways of thinking, how he always made him warm deep inside when he expressed how much he cared for him and Ace. Ace, Luffy called as he leapt onto the sleeping figure that woke up instantly with a yelp, curling in pain. Luffy, you idiot. How many times have I told you not to do that? Ace growled, knocking his attacker on the head. Sorry, Ace. I won't do it again. Luffy rubbed the swollen bump while smiling. Ace gave a tusk, rubbing the soreness from his chest. He noticed the drawings covering his torso and glared at the culprit once again. Ace, I want to do a dragon bond. A what? The anger quickly shifted to confusion. A bad feeling settled inside him. After all, Luffy's a magnet to trouble. A dragon bond. Sabo's book says that it's a bond of shared feelings, Luffy replied, bouncing on his feet. Oh, Ace shrugged. I guess that's cool. But it's probably not true. He walked away to a bowl of water, grabbing a rag to clean his chest, grumbling about his narcolepsy and troublesome little brothers. Hey, but I want to do it. Luffy was crawling onto his back, tail wrapping against Ace's waist. He pouted, face falling onto Ace's shoulder. Come on, Ace. Let's do it, Luffy whined, but Ace didn't budge. Come on, Ace. Don't you want to bond with your brothers? Sabo teased. Ace noticed his presence as Sabo finished climbing into their treehouse. He groaned at the teasing. Hey, Luffy, why do you want to do the dragon bond? He asked, still shaking his head, unaware of the sly smile stretching on the blonde's face. I want to share my love with Ace and Sabo. And feel closer to them, Luffy announced proudly, not a shred embarrassed, and Ace turned as red as a tomato. Luffy and Sabo both chuckled, watching him. In return, Sabo was smacked face first with a rag and Luffy drenched with water from the bowl. All right, I'll do it. How does it work? He asked. Sabo, annoyed about the dirty rag, handed him the book. Ace read the pages carefully. He was amazed at the contents at first, but then he paled, shoving the book into Sabo's hands. I've changed my mind. I'm not doing it, he exclaimed, stomping off to the other side of the room. What? Why? Come on, Ace. Luffy whined. What's the problem? Sabo looked at the pages again to see if he had missed anything like side effects or sacrificial price, but there wasn't one. Sabo knew Ace wasn't scared of blood. After all, they saw it on a daily basis. So what the issue? He pondered, and then Luffy said something. Ace, do you not love us? Is that why you don't want to do it? Luffy stood there, eyes becoming glassy. Is it because I'm annoying? A crybaby, cause I can't fly? I promise to stop and I will learn how to fly. I will. His voice was slowly rising. Sabo was frozen, his mind thinking quickly. He knew those weren't the reasons for Ace's refusal, but he had to do something quick. He glanced at the oldest brother who seemed shaken by the Luffy's words. It was only after he read how to do it that, and then the thought hit him. He sighed, face relaxing. Why didn't he notice sooner? Causing all this fuss. Stupid Ace. Stepping up, he kneeled next to Luffy, whispering to him. It was a quiet moment before Luffy gave a loud A, Sabo quickly shushing the boy. Luffy turned to Ace with wide eyes as he had taken in the new information before dashing towards Ace suddenly. Luffy squeezed his leg, tears brimming in his eyes. I'm sorry, Ace. I'm sorry. I didn't know that you didn't want to hurt us. Ace really loves us. Please don't be mad. Ace's heart ached as he heard his little brother cry. He couldn't stand it when Luffy cried, especially when it was because of him. He reached down, running his fingers through the black hair. It's okay, Luffy. I'm not mad. Really? Luffy sniffled. Ace smiled at him, holding him tightly. I really want to do it, Ace. Ace won't hurt me or Sabo because I know you love us. I want to do this so we're never alone. Being alone hurts. You really want this? Ace asked again, just to be sure. Luffy gave a quick nod. I want this. I want to be with Ace and Sabo forever. Fine, Ace mumbled, causing Luffy's mood to instantly brighten as he cheered. Luffy running around until he clung to Sabo telling the good news, while Sabo tried to calm him down. You're really alright with this? Sabo asked. Yeah, can't say no after hearing all that. Ew. Sabo knew exactly what he meant. Don't worry, I know you won't hurt me. And Luffy's right. That's if the bond is true. It would be nice to feel closer. It will work, Luffy exclaimed. The older brothers just couldn't figure out why Luffy was so sure. Maybe it was his instinct. So we all exchange blood through biting each other? That's it? Ace asked Sabo. He sat back on the floor, legs stretched as he leaned back on his hands. Sabo followed but crossed his legs instead. He opened the book to show him the picture Luffy had seen earlier. Basically, yes, the book states that both dragons bite each other on the neck, though it doesn't mention about it happening at the same time or individually. So we'll have to decide on that, Sabo explained. Dragons? Wait a minute, what about humans? Won't there be side effects? Ace worried for his kin. Doesn't say, Sabo shrugged. Not to mention my teeth aren't as sharp as yours. It'll hurt a bit more, he pointed to his teeth. Great, Ace grumbled, rubbing his neck. You sure you want to do this, Luffy? Luffy nodded repeatedly, getting excited by each passing second. It'll be fine, Luffy reassured them. So how do you want to do this? We can take it in turns or do it together and swap, Sabo asked, snapping the book closed. Together. Let's do it together. The youngest boy cheered. Okay then. Luffy sat on Ace's lap facing him. Luffy didn't hesitate as he followed the instructions. Sabo shuffled in front Ace, Luffy sandwiched between them. Ready? A nod was all they gave before sinking their teeth in each other's left shoulders. Sabo bit Luffy, who bit into Ace, and Ace leaned over Luffy to bite into Sabo. Pain tore in each bite, screaming to stop. But none of them pulled away, determined to fight through it until it was just an ache. The taste of copper filled their mouths and blood flowed down their throats. Luffy was the first to stop after a few gulps, lapping at the wound. Ace and Sabo followed soon after. You okay, Lu? Ace embraced the little body. Luffy gave a nodding as his brother looked over him, concerned. All right, Lu, you need to turn around, the third brother instructed. Luffy was able to turn with some delicate handling from the other two, and he was now facing Sabo. Like before, Luffy provided a short nod just before they bit onto skin a second time, the same place as the first. After removing their lips and lapping at the wound, they were able to see what they had done. Luffy gleamed at the two as he inspected the bites on his brother's shoulders that would no doubt mark their skin for the rest of their lives. The other two looked at his with fondness, pride and delight expressed through their eyes. It was later that night, as they were nestled together, sleeping with some bandages placed on their skin, when Luffy felt tender warmth forming on his left shoulder, spreading through his body. That night Luffy felt closer to his brothers than ever. It would be a few years that a horrifying event will happen, an event that will cause the three brothers to feel so much pain and loss through each mark they hold on their shoulders. Stay away. The black-suited men ignored Luffy's yells, getting closer with each step. Luffy's body trembled in fright but continued to stand over Ace's bloody body protectively in his dragon form. No, not again. I won't let you take my kin away from me. A man lunged towards them. Luffy swiftly whipped him away with his tail. Get moving. I want that dragon, it must be captured alive. A voice yelled out, causing more men to appear. Leave us alone, he roared, spreading out his black wings as a threatening display, refusing to move away from his kin. Luffy continued to fight the men using everything he had, whipping his tail, striking with his talons and tearing skin with his teeth. Somehow they had managed to completely surround him, noting that they kept out of his striking range. But they were wrong. Luffy's head snapped forward, his neck stretching due to his devil fruit. He bit into the man, making him drop his gun and screech. Luffy was about to release the torn flesh until he felt multiple hands grabbing his long neck, refusing to let go. Panic settled inside Luffy as they pinned him down, his body struggling at the new weight jumping on him, and he tried to throw them off. It was useless as the weight became overwhelming and his whole form was held down by at least 20 soldiers. Feeling the cold chains wrapping around him, his movements became weak, all energy draining from his body. The bodies gradually removed themselves once the chains were fully on. Tears fell down his scaled face as he sighted Ace a few feet away, peacefully slumbering. Damn, I'm too weak. I can't save anyone. He whined through the binds. My family. I've lost everything. Take it to my ship. A painful cry vibrated from Luffy's chest as he watched his kin become distant. Luffy was dragged away, the darkness swallowing him. LHHH. A scream echoed, jolting the sleeping boy off the floor. Luffy panted erratically, observing the familiar cage. Once recognizing his surroundings, the fear faded, leaving him hollow and numb, hugging his skinny arms around his knees, protecting himself from the harsh reality. He wept silently, burying his head while the memory haunted him. Pain was all he remembered from it. It had hurt so much watching his kin die in front of him. even more so as he had felt tearing burn in his shoulder, burn of them dying and being dragged away from his family. So traumatizing that it haunted his dreams ever since, returning with a numb hollowness each time he woke. His brothers were gone. They died right in front of him. He missed them so much, missed the days they hunted together, training each day. He even missed Ace's scolding. He didn't like the dark silence that surrounded him. It was lonely. It hurt so much. Suddenly, a familiar sensation creeped up beneath his skin. Luffy raised his head, covering the marks on his shoulders, sensing the mixed feelings that flowed from them. Sorry for waking you. It was just another nightmare. He smiled sadly. It had been a shock when he felt the emotions running through his skin for the first time since he was taken. But Luffy was relieved that he was still able to feel his brothers even when they were gone, keeping him sane this whole time. His tiny fingers brushed over each bite, the worry slowly ebbing away but not completely disappearing. It felt comforting to have his brothers there. Luffy was pulled from his thoughts with a loud slam. Not needing to look up, he knew that 4 knights were approaching. As usual, 2 held poles as tall as themselves with loops at the end, the third holding multiple straps. The 4th knight, a spear in hand, led the way, stopping at Luffy's cage. The leader unlocked the door, entering first. Luffy eyed them as soon as they all stepped in. The leader drew in closer, to which he gave a snarl, his sharp teeth on show. Instantly, the knight stood in a defensive position. "Behave, slave," he said, pointing his spear at Luffy. 2 knights moved quickly, using their poles to loop 2 ropes around his neck, and Luffy gasped at the tightness. His efforts seemed to fade. The air cut away from his body. Only when he collapsed to the floor did the ropes loosen enough to breathe. Change. The knight pressed the spear's tip to Luffy's side. He twitched at the cut, growling once more before adjusting to his hands and knees. Doing as commanded, his body started to change. As he transformed, pale skin turned into black hardened scales across his whole body. His feet and hands grew sharp claws that scratched into the metal floor. Then, a whip-like tail, 3 times longer than his body, stretched from his body and curled around the small prison. Now a black dragon, slightly bigger than a human, stood between the knights. Satisfied, the leader signaled to the last knight with the straps. The said man rushed, placing the multiple straps along Luffy's body. Luffy fought more, feeling the metal and straps wrapping around his face. He whined, trying to scratch off the muzzle, not liking how constricting it all was. They vanished, only to return with a saddle. Luffy spied the object with a hiss, increasing the noise as he felt the familiar leather and cushion pressing down on his back. Finally done, the knights guided him forcefully out of his cage and onto the deck of a large ship. "I see my beast has been prepared." A snobbish voice spoke. "Yes, my lord. It is saddled and ready as you have ordered." A tall, well-dressed man bowed to his master. Raising himself, he then gestured to the various sullen women that were chained and lined up nearby. "My lord, which wives shall be accompanying you on your outing?" His Highness didn't spare them a glance, instead just fanned his hand. "Well, bring wives 9 to 12, he said, walking towards Luffy. "Very well, my lord." The man bowed once more before directing knights to retrieve the said wives. The 4 women followed without question as they were collected and pulled near the black dragon, though some displayed worried looks at being close to the creature. Luffy ignored them, becoming used to such reactions. When his chain was tugged by a knight, he reluctantly lowered his body as his so-called master stood expectantly next to him. "Lower, you're annoying. Stupid beast, can't understand a simple order." He kicked at Luffy with his white heel. Luffy growled at the action, to which the man stepped back, cautious yet sneering. "How dare you growl back at me?" The man raised his cane as a signal, and suddenly a strap was tightening around his neck, making him choke. Reluctantly, he gave in and lay onto the deck, watching his master smirk in triumph, approaching him again. Inwardly, Luffy laughed as he saw the fat man constantly struggle to climb onto the saddle, ordering for assistance. Luffy swiftly became annoyed, feeling the bigger weight climbing onto him, so he faced away. He looked around to distract himself of the annoyance, and for the first time after walking onto deck, Luffy took in his surroundings. His eyes sparkled at humongous strip trees, but the most interesting thing were the numerous bubbles floating everywhere. Then pain erupted at his side, with the loud order, "Move." Sabo gripped his side from the abrupt pain, a hiss passing his lips, before he began to carefully massage the muscle. Hearing similar groans, he checked the Raven man sitting on the opposite side of the table. Of course, Ace was feeling the same discomfort as him. Ace growled, rubbing the stinging away from his ribs. He then looked away from his own skin, giving Sabo a glance, then cutting it off as he bowed the orange hat, clicking his tongue. Sabo persisted with worry, though, observing the way Ace secretly bit his inner lip and how his arms gradually tensed. He focused back to the drink that sat with him. He thumbed the tankard as his mind began to drift. Really, he wasn't that surprised with Ace's bad mood, and he could hardly blame him. It had been a stressful day walking around the place, all the while constantly being surrounded by people. The crowds didn't bother him too much, but he knew Ace was having a tough time. Considering the part, he never liked humans very much. Of course, with the odd exception, It had been a year since the horrid day, since Luffy was stolen from them, leaving him and Ace to die. They decided instantly to chase after their brother once they found out, but since then Ace had changed. Sabo noticed the way the dislike of humans had grown to hate, how he was constantly on guard around them. They had scars, some deeper than others. Sabo gently trailed his fingers over the burns that covered the left side of his face, trailing downwards until reaching the bond mark. He caressed it tenderly, wondering if his little brother could feel the comforting touch. Then Ace mumbled under his breath, "Huh." Sabo returned attention back to Ace. The pain, it was stronger than usual. Ace slouched in his seat. Sabo didn't miss the way his hand clenched around his tankard. Sabo couldn't see his eyes due to the cowboy, but he didn't have to, knowing that Ace was probably watching the straw hat that sat on his lap. "I guess it means that we're getting closer," Sabo said. Ace hummed. Ace always had the hat with him. Sabo had insisted that it would be best that Ace looked after it, and ever since, Ace never let it out of his sight. If it wasn't hanging from his back, it was in his lap as he fidgeted with the rim, just like he was doing right now. It had taken a year of traveling the Grand Line, fighting enemies while searching for any hint of Luffy, to lead them here, Sabayati Archipelago, the last island before crossing over to the New World, also known for its large slave trade. Just thinking about it made Sabo want to puke, maybe even burn the whole island to the ground. Though, if they wanted to find Luffy, then their best bet was here, if his gathered information was anything to go by. Many types of people, including slaves, had come through Sabayati for many reasons, and so Sabo had hoped that the news of someone owning a dragon would be easy to come by. But that hadn't been the case. It had been a few days since they had arrived. The two captains had split from the crew as soon as they had arrived, telling them to enjoy themselves while the ship was being coated. Alone, Sabo and Ace were able to explore easily, going to every possible place they could find during their entire stay. At one point they had seen the amusement park, and Ace talked about how Luffy would go crazy for the place, probably dragging them both onto every ride he thought would make them queasy. In the end they found themselves empty-handed. How the hell the largest slave-trading island hadn't had a single gossip of a black dragon was beyond him. Now, they were sat in a bar scattered with pirates. Sabo sighed, pulling a scroll from his blue jacket. He spread the sheet out onto the bar table, showing a map of the island and its many sections. "There are still a couple of slave markets I can check," he said, tapping his fingers over the map. Ace raised his head, presenting Sabo a suspicious stare. Don't you mean us?" "Damn," Sabo cursed. He was hoping his idiot brother wouldn't pick up on it. "I can't really take you if you're going to make a scene." The blonde made his point. "Hey, that guy deserved it. How dare he try to sell us a guy in a dragon costume? He's lucky he's still alive." Ace banged a fist atop of the table. "And the guy before that?" Sabo raised a brow, crossing his arms. "He was talking a load of shit, laughing at us, saying dragons weren't real." Ace was baring his teeth now. Sabo continued, not intimidated the slightest. "What about the rest?" "Okay, they all deserved it. Why should it matter? It's not like anyone's going to be upset about me attacking a load of slave traders." "Ace, I'm not saying they didn't deserve it, but this is probably why you need to take a break." Ace's mouth opened. "And don't say you don't, Ace." He paused. "You're hurting, we both are, but I can see that you're worse off. I've been watching. You haven't eaten properly and you haven't slept in days. I'm actually starting to miss your narcolepsy attacks." Sabo smirked as Ace scowled at that last sentence. "I just can't. Not now when I can feel how strong his pain is." A sorrowful expression crossed his face with a small forceful smile. "In a way I'm relieved. Not just because I can share his pain, but it reminds me that he is still alive. That he's still waiting for us." Of course Sabo knew what his older brother meant. Throughout their whole journey they could feel each other through the dragon bond, even if it was a little. They could feel the suffering that their smallest brother was going through. At first they felt relieved that they could still feel the bond, but at the same time it would anger them greatly. The thought of someone even harming their hatchling. Ace would even blow out at points, saying how useless he felt, tearing down anything nearby. Thankfully Sabo would be there to calm the raven down. Though, it got a lot worse when they didn't sense anything from Luffy in a while, stressing Sabo at these times. Sabo didn't like to think about how out of hand they both had previously gotten, causing the Marines to raise their bounties once again. "And if he's close, I want to be there for him. I want to hug and tell him I'm sorry, not just for failing him, letting them take him, but for after. Because of me we can never go back. Sabo slammed his hands onto the table, nearly jumping Ace out of his seat. A couple of other costumers glanced their way, annoyed. It took a moment for Sabo to make sure no eyes were directed at them. Only then he rose his own, focusing them on Ace from under the brim of his top hat. The recipient didn't dare turn away. "Ace, what happened wasn't your fault. Not yours, mine, or even Luffy's. And what you did to Goa, you weren't. If anything, they had set themselves up for it." Sabo leaned over the table, pinching both of Ace's freckled cheeks. "If you want to blame something, then it's that we weren't strong enough. Isn't that what we've been doing this past year? Becoming stronger, much stronger, so that none of us would be torn from each other again." All right, I'm sorry. Sabo's gloved hand released the cheek. Tusk, did you have to pinch my face? It's really annoying and it hurts, Ace said, soothing the red skin. Next time I'll go for the ears. Sabo smiled innocently, but under that mask was a little pinching demon. Brighten up a bit and don't worry about our little hatchling so much. He'll be so happy to see us. Sabo quickly changed to a better topic. Ah, he'll be more jealous that we became pirates before him, Ace replied, taking a few gulps from his tankard. It would have happened anyway. We are 9 years older than him. We'll make it up to him and take him to every island he wants. I heard there are lots of food islands in the New World. Ace released a small laugh. I could just imagine him trying to eat a whole island and still complain he's hungry. Sabo stifled his own laughter under his hand. Now, how about I order us some food? Sabo got up, deciding that he was getting hungry at the mention of food. He didn't have to wait for his brother's reply as Ace's stomach growled, causing the freckled lad to redden. He crossed to the food bar, weaving between the chairs and tables. Once reaching the counter, he called the barkeep, who motioned that he would need to wait. Resting his head in his palm, he leaned onto the bar as he waited. Closing his eyes, he focused on the surrounding people, from the barkeep's orders to the constant chatter. Can you believe it? A drunken voice spoke. It must be a joke. No way, it's true. No, it is. I heard it from my mate. They're putting it up for auction today. They'll certainly sell it for an extortionate price. Well, what do you expect for a rare slave? Those nobles will spend so much on it and still have tons left over. His interest peaking, Sabo observed the 3 drunken men sitting at the bar not far from him. Man, I wish we had that kind of money. If we had that money, we wouldn't be pirates, one said, causing the others to laugh loudly, unaware of Sabo approaching behind them. He smiled down politely, tricking the souls before him. Excuse me, gentlemen, I couldn't help overhearing you. Could you tell me more about this auction? A while had passed since Sabo had left him. During that time, he had stared off into oblivion, his fingers playing with the red material wrapped around the straw hat. Don't worry, Lou, we're coming. When he looked up, he watched Sabo pacing quickly towards their table. You all right? Where's the food? He questioned with raised brow. He became more intrigued as Sabo collected up the map from the table. I'm fine, said Sabo, putting the map away. Sabo, he called, telling his brother he knew better. The said blonde bit his lip as if he was deciding on something. Look, I might have a lead, but I'm only taking you if you promise to listen and do as I say. You have to stay calm. Lead. Ace didn't have to question it since it was Sabo. Fine, Ace, I mean it. This place will be crowded with people. The information made Ace cringe, thinking how he would be stuffed with a load of humans. But he had to do it. He wouldn't let his brothers down. Ace stood, placing the straw hat onto his back, his face full of determination once more. I promise. Now let's go find our brother, said Ace, finally walking out of the bar, Sabo beside him. It took them about half an hour walking to arrive at their destination. As they walked through the many mangroves that surrounded them, Sabo had told him some of the information he had just found out. There was an auction house where all the best slaves were taken to, and there was a rare slave that would be put up for sale today. But there was a small catch. The reason the best slaves were sold there was that the house was full of nobles. Like Sabo warned, the human shop of Grove 1 was packed with humans, full of nobles, with the odd few pirates looking to possibly add a member or two. Ace could barely stand the stench of rich perfumes and the other trashy smells these people gave off. He turned to Sabo, who was covering his nose. Ace grabbed the gloved hand lightly, pulling it down from the other's face. Sabo sent him a questioning glare. Your claws are out, he whispered. Sabo inspected his hand, now displaying razor-sharp nails cutting the glove's fingertips. Sabo groaned, focusing his claws to return. He removed the gloves, stuffing them into his pocket as he complained about now needing a new pair. Just slightly uncomfortable, Sabo reasoned. Ace gave an understanding nod, sharing his brother's emotions. He was glad he wasn't the only one. It was most likely why they had chosen to sit in the far back, so they could be as far away from the irritating humans but still be able to see the stage clearly. His view was quickly blocked by a scrap of paper. He took it curiously from the offering hand of his kin, giving it his attention. His brows furrowed as he read the disgusting words. Humans, Billy 500,000 plus. Dwarves, Billy 700,000 plus. Mink tribe, Billy 700,000 plus. Longarm tribe, Billy 700,000 plus. Longleg tribe, Billy 700,000 plus. Snakeneck tribe, Billy 700,000 plus. Fishmen, Billy 1 million plus. Giants, male giants, Billy 50 million plus. Female giants, Billy 10 million plus. Merfolk, unparted female, Billy 70 million plus. Male, Billy 1 million plus. Parted female, Billy 10 million plus. Devil fruit users, market price. What's this? A price list and also my lead. The important slave that's up today is not on the list. It's not much, but it's great, Sabo, Ace whispered with a hopeful expression. Not a minute later that the lights began to dim, leaving only the stage lit, calling for everyone's eyes. A man danced on with a long coat, starred sunglasses, and a yellow, flowered top hat on. In Ace's opinion, he was the weirdest funky-looking creature he'd probably seen. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the largest slave trading house of the All Blues. I am your host, the walking bazaar, Mr. Disco. Smoke and glitter exploded from the stage, causing the audience to cheer in excitement. Ace just sneered in his seat at the ridiculous display. That for the nobles it was just a show. The ugly man called for the first slave to be brought on while boasting about the chained human like a prize. It was places like these that reminded Ace how much he hated humans. It was revolting how they turned on their own kind and others for the ugliest of reasons. The auction continued, bringing on a different slave after another. They were at the 9th slave before one of the small stage helpers jogged up and whispered to the host, "My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be taking a short break." The colorful man vanished from the stage, leaving his audience to wonder about the sudden interruption. He looked to Sabo, a questioning shrug in return. Moments later the entrance opened, and upon recognizing the white figures entering, eyes were cast down as to not make eye contact with the newcomers. Ace grit his teeth at them, eyes burning at the familiar clothing. 2 men strolled in, both wearing a large white coat with bubble helmet and hair pointing upward as if it had just been sucked by a vacuum dial. Celestial dragons. Everyone knew of their existence, the self-proclaimed gods descendants of this world. What a load of bullshit. His instincts were screaming at him to rip the men where they stood. It was then that Sabo griped his arm, giving him the "don't do anything stupid" look. The whole room was silent except for the continuous tapping as the host reappeared by the side of the Celestials in a slight bow, guiding them to their seats. Ace was relieved that he could hardly scent anything clearly through the mess of smells. It spared him having the honor of getting a sniff of the world nobles. As soon as the Celestials were seated, they waved the host off. Mr. Disco quickly went back to the stage, not wanting to upset the scary nobles. Immediately, he returned to his performance with a large smile. "Thank you for being patient, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now be continuing the wonderful show with number 9. The show continued as if nothing had happened. From then time seemed to drag on, tapping his boot as he waited for the important slave to make its appearance. His irritation grows with each slave being sold to new masters. At one point a chained fishman had been dragged on stage, the bid growing higher until one of the Celestials bids. Of course, no one dared to outbid him. Finally, my wonderful audience, Mr. Disco spun to center of the stage. We have one final slave today, but not just any slave. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I have saved the best for last." Drums thundered, bringing the audience to the edge of their seats. Even Ace leant closer with hopeful eyes. "A rare slave, just for you." With a click of the host's fingers, the curtains parted and Ace's eyes widened, focusing on the revealed figure. It wasn't him, it wasn't Luffy. That was the first thing that the brothers thought, many emotions running between them. Frustration, sadness, as it turned out to be another dead end at finding Luffy, but also shock and anger as they observed the newly revealed slave. "Are they crazy bringing that thing here? They're asking for their own deaths," Ace internally yelled. It was the first time seeing one for him. Not that he was eager to meet one, knowing from the books that Sabo used to read to them. But there was no mistake, looking at the creature. The figure was slightly smaller than a giant and wrapped in various chains, clanging as it tugged at each one. No one took their eyes off the creature, scanning the powerful muscles that demonstrated the strength it possessed. From a distance anyone could mistake it as a giant if not for the unusual facial features, 2 tusk-like teeth protruding from the mouth and 1 large eye. They had brought in a goddamn cyclops, of all things. Number 19 is a cyclops standing at 10 meters, but it's strong as any giant. The item is excellent for manual labor, a lethal fighter and collection piece. Mr. Disco bragged. "We'll start the bidding on this brilliant cyclops at 100 million beris." The bidding began quickly. A bidder followed by another, shooting their hands as they called a higher price. "Idiots have no clue what they're really buying," Ace heard his brother say, but they weren't going to stop them, noting the cyclops sniffing the air with drool dripping down its jaw. "We better get out of here." Sabo motioned to the entrance. Ace nodded, both feeling each other's nervousness. They carefully moved out of their seats to not draw any attention, but as they were making their way up the stairs they heard the celestial dragon yell. 600 million beris. The expensive amount caused everyone to be outbided. "Sold to St. Clarington," Mr. Disco announced, slamming his mallet onto the podium. "Clarington, what are you doing buying such a dull beast?" the other celestial asked. "I was thinking of how interesting it would be to pit that creature with my dragon. Let's see which fares better." Ace bolted around suddenly, his whole attention directed at the celestial dragons. His body vibrated. No way did he imagine it. No way could he have missed those words pouring out of the horrid noble's mouth. His eyes filled with rage as he processed the words. This guy had a dragon. Sabo heard the words too, but he kept his composure to not give away the hate he was holding. On the other hand, Ace wasn't doing so well. He didn't need the bond to know that Ace was pissed. Walking back further into auction hall, however, he didn't try to stop the raven. Instead, Sabo sidestepped away, giving him plenty of space. It was his way of giving the go-ahead as Ace passed him. Gasps and whispers slowly spread, the audience just noticing the dangerous rookie, who was approaching behind the Celestial. Drums rumbled in Ace's ears, drowning out his surroundings, except for the prey lying in front of him, getting closer and closer. However, sea and leaves filled his scenes and stunned him mid-step. It smelt wonderful, as if he was back home, sitting on the cliff with his brothers. It was calming, and it filled Ace with a sense of peace, taking the familiar scent. Lou, a golden wide smile flashed in his mind. It was so powerful it felt as if he was being hit by one of Luffy's rocket attacks, winding him completely, yet in a good way. But the trance was broken when he saw where it was coming from, pinpointing the white-dressed noble. Confusion hit him until he connected the dots. There was only one reason why Luffy's smell was on this human. How dare this man touch his kin, to even mention harming his hatchling? The happy emotions reverted back to anger, but now it was fueled with a goal: to rip this piece of shit to pieces. What did you just say? He gritted out with demonic eyes. The noble glanced over his shoulder, discovering the shadowed figure looming over him. A spark of fear passed through Clarington before he became infuriated. Damn vermin, you dared to look at the Celestial was cut off. Ace had hit through the glass and suspended the human with his throat tight between his fingers. The human wheezed, clasping Ace's wrist as he struggled to breathe. Everyone else in room became shaken and jaws hung at what they had just witnessed, their minds completely stunned. He just attacked a Celestial D-Dragon, a voice stuttered. It was as if it had broken all the audience out of a trance, because the next thing was utter chaos. Everyone screamed out in horror. He's killed us all. Run for your lives. They'll punish us. Hurry before an admiral shows up. The crowd dispersed in a frenzy, every person swarming to every possible exit, shoving everything in their way and trampling over others. It was another reason why Ace hated the humans. They cared about nothing but themselves. Now tell me, what were you saying about a dragon? Ace raised his eyes, meeting his prey's own. That dragon wouldn't happen to be a small boy with black hair, would it? Clarington's eyes widened at the question, looking back with new fear. This is outrageous, touching the descendants of gods. I'll dispose of you myself. The second Celestial pulled out a gun, aiming at Ace's bare back. You annoying pest. Die now. Shots rang through the room as the man pulled the trigger. Pop, 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 pop. Luffy watched the bubbles burst from where he sat. It was just moments ago that his so-called master and companion, along with the rest, had disappeared into the large building with a sign showing human, leaving Luffy leashed at the entrance, with the usual comment that animals should wait for their masters outside. Not that Luffy minded too much, not eager to go with the two nobles. Instead, he rather enjoyed the outside, watching the flying balls. He hadn't been able to take his eyes off them since he got on the island, fascinated by the mystery bubbles that seemed to come from the ground. However, he whined in annoyance at being unable to play with them. He thought he could possibly try to climb and bounce on one, see how high it would take him. From the corner of his eye, he spotted one blowing up close by, and he crouched in position, stalking his prey as it grew bigger. Once it left the grass, he pounced toward it but ended up flat on his back. Luffy groaned, opening his eyes to stare up at the unharmed bubble above, mocking him. He snarled at it before rolling back onto his belly, reaching again. But it was no use as it continued to drift higher away from the claws. Luffy whined at his failure before turning a blameful look over his shoulder at the pinned-down chain. It didn't deter Luffy, though. Instead, he continued to entertain himself, jumping at bubbles nearby. At one point, he took advantage of the soapy ground and started to slide and roll in it. Distracted, he didn't notice someone approaching the entrance. The new voice startled Luffy, who got into a defensive stance. Facing the new character, standing a distance away, he found that it was a man. A very old man, judging by his appearance. He had long, white hair, trimmed, stripped beard that bushed together at the bottom, and he wore a white cap. Not only that, the stranger gave off the smell that Luffy was familiar with, from when he spent time with Shanks at the bar. Just like Shanks, this man was a drinker. Luffy's guess was proven when the man grasped a small flask before taking a few gulps. Seems like the auction has already started. And here I was planning to sell myself as a slave so I could steal some money. He smirked, scratching the back of his head. Well, that's impossible now. Guess I'll have to pickpocket some nobles. He laughed loudly. Oh, well, what do we have here? Gray Eyes spied the black dragon near the entrance and advanced toward it, wanting to get a closer look. When the elder became too close for comfort, Luffy growled in warning and snapped his jaw threateningly. The recipient halted and he crouched down, presenting Luffy with a drunken smile. It's been a long time since I've seen a dragon. Not seen a hatchling before though, HM. Let me guess, you're 10. No, too small. HM. 8. The man jerked back quickly, avoiding the swish of a long tail, as if expecting the attack. Oh, feisty hatchling, aren't you? He commented, figuring he was close to the mark. So, what's a little guy like you doing here? A frown formed then, as he noticed the rest of the dragon's form. Luffy felt uncomfortable as the stranger's eyes seemed to look at him, not sure why. It was then that his mark stressed intense feelings. Luffy thought that his brothers were probably nervous, even suspicious of the stranger, thinking how the two kin would warn him to be careful and scold him when he didn't listen. The stranger turned attention to the chain, then back at Luffy again. I get it. The carefree smile returned, his eyes trained on Luffy. How about we get those heavy things off you? Luffy ceased his growling and tilted his head instead, confused at why the human would want to help him. He stared at the stranger as if looking at his soul. Instinctively, Luffy decided the man to be a good person and responded with a brief nod. Ace's mark flared, screaming at Luffy that he was too trusting. It's okay, Ace. We can trust him, Luffy whined. The stranger raised a brow at the last noise curiously but brushed it off. At least he had got an answer. Honestly, he was expecting to be ignored as many slaves seemed to do. He was glad to see that the hatchling still had spirit. Luffy allowed the elderly human to come closer until he kneeled beside him. He tensed when he saw the man present a knife from his clothing, but Luffy didn't make a sound, granting the blade to draw closer. He wouldn't doubt the other's words. Afterwards, the straps were sliced away, even the muzzle. Feeling the metal slip off his scaly face, Luffy released a sound akin to a purr. It was amazing, stretching and shaking his body free of the removed weight. He leaped to the man, nudging his head into his shoulder gratefully. The man chuckled at the dragon's reaction. Don't thank me yet. A wrinkled hand patted Luffy's head. He receded back slightly, palm moving so to raise Luffy's head. Now for the tricky bit, he said, pointing to the collar still hanging around Luffy's neck. This is going to make a loud noise, so when it's off you'll have to hurry, he warned. Luffy answered with a snort, causing the man to laugh hard. Is that so? Well then, he grinned, reaching out and tapping the collar, causing it to start ticking. Tick, 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 tick. Suddenly, there were two explosions. Opening his eyes, Luffy looked down, finding his collar was gone. He looked around, wondering where the other threw it, only to see it falling out of a cloud of smoke and clanging to the ground. Oh, looks like someone has started their own fun. Guess we'll have to move faster, the older man said as he raised his head. Luffy directed his toward the auction house, where the other was staring. Luffy heard the panicked cries from inside, as well as multiple shots, but what put him on edge was the hot smell of fire. You better hurry, kid. Looks like something interesting happened and it won't be long till the Marines are here. The elder stood up, but Luffy shook his head, and then bit on the white cape. He tugged, urging his new friend to run. Sorry, but I can't go with you, he said, stroking Luffy's head, who groaned at the touch and nipped at the hand. Ho ho ho. Don't worry, little one, I can take care of myself. I'm not just some old man. Crossing both arms, he held himself proudly. Now, use that nose of yours and head to the coast. You'll find plenty of ships there to sneak on, though I suggest getting some clothes on before changing. Don't want to see a little child running around naked. Luffy hesitated, staring worriedly up at him. Finally, he ran, believing that his friend would be safe, sprinting away under and over the many mangrove roots. The elder man watched the small figure dash, becoming even smaller. Drinking from his flask, he lifted his head, looking to the distance where the dragon vanished. Such a shame we had to meet like this, but I'll wait till we meet again. Monkey D. Luffy. He smirked. Shots sounded through the auction hall. The bullets cut into the air like a knife, full speed until stabbing into flesh. Ace felt the bullets passing through his body, but there was no pain. Just 3 flaming holes appearing on his torso. The bullets continued, instead hitting the man that Ace was holding, blood staining the white coat as it flowed out and down the body. Ace grit his teeth in irritation, listening to faint heartbeats struggling from his hostage. The devil fruit. The celestial dragon stuttered, backing away, petrified. As Ace dropped the now dead noble to the floor, he completely turned to his shooter. Ace growled, annoyed that his prey had gone and died on him, glaring at the foolish noble. Since stay away. Do you know who I am? He shot again, right through the raven's head. But Ace's headless body still strutted forward, the flames gathering once more, revealing Ace's head, unharmed. You shouldn't have done that. A calm voice appeared from behind the noble. Sabo had snuck up, kicking the noble's feet from under him and pining his prey down under his foot. He felt the weaker tremble under his boot when he pointed the end of his staff threateningly. No way was he going to let this man escape. Not only for taking Luffy, but for trying to hurt his kin. Ace, you go ahead. No way am I leaving you, Ace snapped, fire flaring up his arms. Ace, get your head out of the fire and listen, Sabo scolded the other. We don't have a lot of time. The Marines will be here soon along with an admiral. So go ahead and find Lu, he can't be far. Ace didn't move, hesitant to separate from his brethren, always feeling uneasy. Yet, he knew Sabo was right. After all, he was the smarter of them. But Ace was stronger and he needed to find Lu and protect him. Don't worry, I'll be right behind you, Sabo said and gave him a reassuring smile. You better. Ace retreated, running toward the exit. The knights blocked his path, quickly trying to stop him from escaping. But as he raised an ignited fist, calling out Hyken, a blast of fire exploded forward, clearing the way, and he sprinted past the burnt figures. You better come back or I'll kill you myself, Sabo huffed. knowing that Ace was going to complain later. Hopefully his sulking wouldn't last long once they got Luffy back. He observed the room, counting about 20 guards left. "Well, gentlemen, are you just going to stand there?" Sabo mocked them, at which they ran at him. Sabo leapt up, dodging the thrusting spear, next landing on it with his and spinning his legs, sending roundhouse kicks, knocking 7 men back. He continued the fight, hitting each enemy down easily, and before long he had whacked another 11 guards unconscious. "You useless fools, protect me," the Celestial demanded. 2 guards stood defensively beside him, trying to escort the man to safety. "I can't allow that." Sabo strolled up the stairs as he twirled the staff at his side, menacing shadows shrouding him. The guards lunged at him, but he somersaulted over their heads and swiftly knocked them out. Sabo looked down at the laying figures spread out across the room, then to the stage with calculating eyes. The Cyclops had grown restless, most likely from the intense smell of blood, pulling further at his chains. Some of the restraints were giving way to the mindless beast. Scuffling was heard and Sabo refocused at the main task at hand. The light but evil smile materialized as Sabo sighted his main prey crawling away. "Why are you leaving, Mr. High Noble? I thought you loved to watch fights." Sabo spoke as he shadowed over the man. "You vermin, you'll pay dearly for harming us. I won't let you live. I'll send every soldier. They will hunt you too till you're dead." The man yelled desperately as if expecting his words to be intimidating. "Is that so?" Sabo crouched down, bowing his head to shadow his eyes. "Then I really can't grant you to leave, can I?" he asked, grabbing the man's ankle and dragging him downwards. What are you doing? Release me." "Mr. Noble, do you know why Cyclops are so dangerous?" Sabo climbed onto the stage with the man in hand. "Of course they're well known for their strength despite their size. However, what makes them so beastly is their small minds and hunger. So basically they are always thinking about food. It kind of reminds me of a certain someone. They won't stop if something comes between their food." They were now both in front of the fierce mythical creature. Sabo lifted and held the noble before him. The man shook in fright as he was faced with the large drooling figure, chains rattling as they loosened. "Ever wondered what they eat?" Sabo whispered. "Humans," he answered for the noble. The chains fell to the stage as the Cyclops released a tremendous roar, free of its restraints. Sniffing around, it crouched down onto its hands, sensing the 2 figures near it. "You're insane. It'll kill us both." "Maybe so, but Cyclops rely a lot on smell." Sabo held strong against his hostage's struggles. "But I have a hunch that I'm in no immediate danger," Sabo stated. The Cyclops stared right at the 2. Sabo, taking this as his quest to separate himself from the celestial dragon. He focused next and his smooth skin became rough yellow scale. His talons grew at his fingertips and finally his teeth became jagged. He stood motionless as the Cyclops sniffed at the 2, felt as if everything went still. Sabo wasn't completely sure that his idea would work, becoming quite nervous as the large beast grunted. If it didn't, he'd have to change tactic. It would be unnecessarily troublesome to fight the Cyclops. The Cyclops roared abruptly, causing saliva to fly everywhere, before snatching the noble up and stuffing the human into its mouth, its jaw crunching down as blood splattered and dribbled down its mouth. Sabo released his breath, not realizing that he was holding it, before walking away. He listened to the dying screams, as well as the sound of grinding bones, as he retreated calmly to the door. Better go find Ace. Not doubt he's causing trouble. Wonder if he found Luffy, he thought to himself. Ace sprinted up the long corridor. He became frustrated as he struggled to capture Luffy's scent. If only I could have beaten that stupid Celestial into telling me. Damn it. Closing in at the entrance, he grasped the smell of the sea. "Lou, we're here." He smirked, following the smell eagerly. He ran through the entrance. "Shit," he cursed, seeing the Marines approaching in the distance. He needed to hurry fast. He sniffed the air, searching for his kin once more. Looking down, Ace spotted something metal with a load of straps by his feet. Picking it up, he gave it a whiff and it smelt like Luffy. He inspected the metal curiously before he recognized what it was. A muzzle. They used a muzzle, the words echoed in his mind. His poor little Luffy was muzzled like a rabid dog. In that moment, the surrounding Marines saw an unforgiving monster, something that would haunt their nights forever. The air was thick with fear. The whole island was in panic as he continued to dash through the large mangroves. Luffy panted as his tiny legs continued to dash past the large mangroves surrounding him. There was no end of them. His legs were aching and he was tired, but he wouldn't stop. He refused to. "I won't let them get me. I won't. I don't want to go back there." These thoughts motivated him as he sprinted, searching for the coast. It was difficult with the chaos happening on the island, nearly everyone running around leaving layers of smells. What was harder, though, was trying to stay out of sight. He already had a few close calls with some Marines, as they searched and gathered a few pirates. Luffy was getting really annoyed as he hid down a dark alleyway, ducking when a group of soldiers ran past. He scrunched his face, tired of all the noisy humans. If only there was another way. Sabo would know what to do, he thought, gazing at the bubbles going higher till they were no longer in sight. Luffy's mind drifted, the rusty gears working in his head, giving one of his rare thoughtful expressions. Pop! A bubble burst as Luffy grinned like a maniac. Leaving the dark alley, he crawled up to one of the large mangroves. This'll do, he thought, inspecting the tall, thick trunk. It was going to take too much effort scaling the giant tree. And he really was low on time. Spotting the lowest branch, he stepped back and raised his tail and span it. Gamu Gamu no lasso. The dragon's tail whipped out, stretching up at the impossible height, till it wrapped around the mangrove branch and pulled Luffy up. Luffy snickered that his idea had worked, hoping it made his brother proud. The view was a lot better in the high tree, and the air was clear. He sniffed around, relieved that he could easily smell the familiar salty breeze. He moved quicker, now that he was so high, now that he didn't need to worry about being detected or concern himself with down below. Trailing along the branches, he leapt quickly from tree to tree, following the fresh scent. Honestly, Luffy enjoyed climbing the trees as it was something he did constantly back home in the forest. He crossed another branch, but he halted, for what lay before him was an endless body of water. It sparkled and moved happily, as if welcoming him back. He cheered, though no one would be able to hear him due to the height. Briefly, he surveyed beneath, squinting. There were hordes of people flooding the docks. He could hear Marines hollering at the crowd, advising them to remain calm, but no one listened, each person shoving at one another as they tried to get onto a ship of their own. Luffy hummed, thinking that he wouldn't like to be stuffed onto any of those ships. He looked to the other ships but was disappointed, recognizing them as Marine ships. Instantly, he shook his head, not even considering jumping onto the blue ships. It was like asking to be caught again or worse. Suddenly, an image of a happy crazy old man flashed in his mind, which sent shivers down Luffy's body. Definitely not going on there, he thought seriously. He continued to climb the mangroves along the coast, inspecting other ships. They were the same as before, crowded or Marine ships. Luffy was starting to get desperate. He might have to creep onto one of the packed ships in the end, though it would be hard to hide. Captain, we need to hurry. Luffy turned to the panicked voice, climbing closer as he noticed a large ship docked and concealed by some mangrove roots. Peering closer at the ship, Luffy's eyes gleamed. Woo, he thought, seeing the proud Jolly Roger hanging from the mast. It wasn't just any ship, it was a pirate ship. Luffy didn't even have to think as he scurried over the ship, hovering on a branch. Twirling his tail once more, he lowered himself quietly down till he reached the crow's nest, thankfully unnoticed as the pirates seemed to be preoccupied. He watched the men carry various crates onto the deck. Where are the rest of the men? A man in a feathered captain hat spoke. They got caught by the Marines, someone replied. Damn it. The captain raised his sword as the crew looked at him. Okay men, let's get out of here. Set sail, he ordered, followed by the crew cheering and immediately moving into action, not seeing the small stowaway creeping across the deck until he was at the back of the ship and out of sight. Sitting down among the shadows, he finally took notice of the soapy surface covering the deck. Nudging it, he found that it was similar to the soapy ground of the island. Why was it here? Slowly, he saw the soapy film rise, swallowing his clawed feet, and he raised his head away from the floor. What going on? The sticky stuff was now at his knees, slowly growing bigger. It's alive, he gasped. He bit into the gooey thing, but it was useless as his mouth just went through it, not to mention it tasted disgusting. It was now sliding up along his neck. I'm going to die. He inhaled deeply, blowing up his cheeks like a hamster. Luffy held his last breath, eyes tight shut. Plop, plop. Opening his eyes, he found the goo gone. Glancing around, he found the goo above him. It was even bigger, watching as it grew so large that it covered the pirate ship in a large force field. Luffy gazed in amazement, wishing he had a ship that could do that. Hurry, raise the anchor, the captain yelled from the front of the ship. To the new world. The crew roared once more as they scuttled around the deck. After a moment, Luffy found himself deep under the sea's surface, surrounded by the sea's living creatures. As the ship sank deeper in its bubble, Luffy saw weirder and larger creatures. Cool, look at all those fish. He drooled, imagining ways to eat the different fish that passed. He could probably put some salt on that giant eel, grill those smaller fish, and have mayonnaise with that one. A puddle of saliva formed beneath him as he focused on a blob seeking. At this point his belly rumbled with a sad ache, reminding Luffy how hungry he really was. Maybe he could get a snack. It had been a while since the ship that Luffy had stowed away on had reached a strange underwater island. Of course Luffy had been shocked to find that an island was under the sea and how it was there in the first place, but he just decided that it was a mystery island surrounded by a large bubble. As soon as the ship had docked, Luffy had swiftly sneaked away and further into the strange island. Though it had been really difficult to hide from all the eyes that were floating about, he needed to be careful. As he explored the area, he realized that something was weird about the inhabitants. From an alleyway, he peered at the passerbys only to notice that their skins were unusual bright colors. They even had fins and webbing that humans didn't normally have. Quirking his head, he then saw someone with no legs but instead a long colorful stripped fish tail. Oh, they're mermaids. His eyes widen at the realization, thinking back to how his brothers would read various stories to him about them. But why do some of them have legs? Luffy pondered the question till he was getting a headache. After observing the mermaids, he decided that he was getting bored of hiding in the shadows and wanted to eat something. Though looking at his scaly body, he noticed that he wasn't going to get anywhere with how he looked. Luffy didn't know but doubted that the humanoid fishes would like seeing a dragon. Not to mention if he changed, he'd be naked. Whining, he made the decision to find some clothes. Scurrying off, Luffy searched, weaving between the building until spotting the various clothes in front of him. Hanging by the side of the house was a line of washing. Luffy checked to see if anyone was nearby before dashing towards it, snatching various materials with his mouth, though careful so not to tear any. He rushes away unnoticed, back in the forest of coral. Running a short distance, he halted and dropped the stolen items down. He made sure that no one close in the surrounding area. Satisfied, he lets his body change from the dark dragon form to that of a small boy. His hair was still black as night, though covered in dirt just like the rest of him, and his skin was pale due to the softer skin of his not seeing light in over a year. Luffy crawled up from his knees, then patting the loose dirt off. Afterwards, he approached the small pile of clothes. Reaching out, he plucked one up, observing it before discarding it as it was too small, thus continuing to rummage through the pile. Something caught his eye. A string-like clothing. Afterward, he strapped it on just like how he'd seen many mermaids wear it. Straight away, Luffy disliked it. It was tied around his ribs like a snake was constricting his body. Why do they wear these? Luffy snapped the tight clothing off and threw it far away, panting as found it easier to breathe once again. A few minutes later, he'd chosen a white t-shirt with image of a red starfish with the word crimin on it, though it was a little too big, hanging just above the knees. Secondly, a pair of blue shorts. Lucky he was able to fit. Luffy rubbed his hand down the clothing. It felt really weird wearing them. After all, he hadn't covered himself in ages. Now it just felt unnatural. Just then a beastly rumble voiced itself. Luffy clenched his belly with a groan. I'm hungry, drool dripping out of his mouth at the thought of food. He was starving like he hadn't eaten in weeks, even though a guard had thrown him large chunk of meat, but that wasn't enough. Yosh, time to find some food. Stating his next objective, he then sniffed the air like a vacuum. That way, food, he called, dashing off towards the delicious smell. It wasn't long after that Luffy was carelessly running back into the town, this way and that, until halting in front of a small food bar. Taking in the warm, tasty scent, Luffy grinned and hopped into the building and towards the counter. Luffy tiptoed and smiled at the barkeep. What want, kid? The fishman turned, looking at the head of black hair curiously. Luffy looked up to the tall, green-scaled man before speaking. Only no sound came out. Luffy was shocked to say the least, dropping his head and eyes wide as trembling fingers touched his lips. He can't talk. The thought was scary, though he should have expected this after so long of being isolated, unable to speak to anyone. Determined to get some meat, Luffy came up with a small idea. Oi kid, you hear me? I asked what you want. Approaching the small figure, still only being able to see the black mess of hair till it moved, Luffy had lifted his head, looking at the other straight on as he repeatedly pointed to his open mouth. It was minute that he stopped the action, watching full-blown eyes stare down on him, displaying something akin to fear. Luffy didn't like those eyes at all. Yo, Yurei, there's a human child here, the barkeeper yelled. Everyone quickly turned, their eyes spotting the boy. Luffy panicked as he saw the costumers moving away from him, some with nervous eyes, others filled with hate. They don't know who I am, right? What's a human child doing here? Maybe it's one of the pirates' kids. Get it out of here. Someone call the Neptune soldiers. Luffy swiftly made his escape as soon as he heard the mention of soldiers. He ran as far as he could, using the alleyways so no one would see him, and kept on going until he no longer heard the yells. He was starving. Already he has sneaked around snatching pieces of food without anyone seeing. The problem was that it was only shellfish or some fruit. He needed meat. Collapsing onto the ground, Luffy whined as his tummy gave out a painful growl. Then it seemed as if fate was on his side as a juicy taste wafted by, and it was close. Following his nose once more, he came to the edge of the alley and was faced with a bustling crowd. Observing the crowd, Luffy quickly targeted a bag that was giving of the tempting smell. He would have bolted right then and there for the food, but there were a couple of problems. One being that his food was being carried by someone, and that person was walking off with his meat. Carefully, Luffy followed the bag. Peering over a corner, he spotted the source of the tasty meat. He drooled so much that it was making his very own sea at his feet. Standing there was two tall figures. By their stenches, Luffy could say that the large blue figure was a fishman and the other being human, but Luffy was more focused on the later one. That was holding his delicious meat. He was very strange looking in Luffy's opinion as he eyed the all-white clothing, and his hair was the weirdest he'd ever seen, shaped at the front and sticking out. It was round and puffy. It looks like cotton candy. Suddenly his thoughts of whether the hair would be tasty was interrupted as a uniformed form vastly approached, calling out to the two men, "Boss Jimbei." The two men looked to the running Solidified. "What is it?" Jimbei asked. "We need your help." There seems to be a commotion at one of the bars. Commotion. Is anyone hurt? It doesn't seem so. But it seems important. They insist to call for the soldiers. HM, very well, I'll deal with the issue. Which area is it? They quickly inform them on the location before being ordered back. Jinbei turned back to Thatch before bowing his head slightly. I'm afraid that I must leave. Don't want any help. Of course not. It's most likely a small matter. Though I regret not being able to see Pops depart personally. Nah, don't worry about it. Pops will understand. It's good to know that everything is in safe hands while we are away. We look forward to seeing you again. Thatch grinned at the larger fishman. Take care, Jinbei. You too. Tell Pops I wish him well. Then Jinbei dashed off down the main street. Thatch smiled, watching his dear friend leave back into town. Well then, I better hurry or he's going to blow a fuse, Thatch said, speaking to no one but himself. Adjusting the new bags in his arms, he then turned and continued towards the docks. The man hummed a cheery tune, walking through the streets of Fishman Island. But somehow he can't get rid of this feeling that someone's watching him. He pondered as to who it would be. He doubted it was a marine or a bounty hunter unless they were completely idiotic to attack him in Pop's territory. Can't be too careful. A thought struck him, maybe it one of my beloved fans. He grinned, the image of beautiful mermaid trailing after him, hiding because she nervous to ask him out. Ah, my beauty, no need to be shy. He spun around, but was confused as to why there was no mermaid beauty behind him. No one was there, except for the various fishmen and mermaids staring at him curiously, some probably thinking he was crazy, before continuing with their own lives. Thatch felt his cheeks heat, embarrassed how he possibly looked. But that weird feeling was still there. Observing the crowd once more, he doesn't see anything or anyone notable. He glanced at a nearby alley, peering at it suspiciously as if it was calling out to him, though it didn't look out of the ordinary. Maybe his fan was extremely shy. Don't hide from Thatchy, he leapt in front of the alleyway. And once again he faced disappointment, finding it empty. He pouted, upset slightly that there was no shy fan following him. Even his pompadour seemed to droop. Thatch, what are you doing? Jumping from the sudden voice. He turned, facing a familiar blonde figure. Marco, what you doing here? Looking for you. You were supposed to be at the Moby Dick 20 minutes ago. Marco crossed his arms, demonstrating his annoyance. Wasn't Jinbei with you? Yeah, he was, but he had to leave due to some business. Oh, and what are you doing down an alley? I was looking for my fan. This caused Marco to roll his eyes, turning around and walking away, followed by the redhead. Don't look at me like that. They're real. I swear someone was following me. And you thought it was a fan of yours of all things. Well, of course, who else could be? I mean, no beauty could resist this handsome face, Thatch said with a smug face. Marco sighed, rubbing away the oncoming headache. We don't have time for this. We need to get back soon. What's the rush? Just got a call. A few newbies causing trouble on Pop's turf in the New World. Not really strong, but Pops wants to sail out as soon as possible. It took a while to walk to the docks due to the large groups of people. The surrounding area was unusually busy, however the brothers noted the amount of ships that were docked. Is it just me or is there more ships all of a sudden? You're not imagining it. Most likely something happened on Sabayati causing every ship to flee. Hey, wonder what happened. You go on ahead. I'll see if I can find anything out. Thatch nodded, walking towards the edge of the docks, where he could see a gigantic ship that had a front shaped as a white whale's head. He watched the various crew members that he called brothers moving around the Moby Dick as he boarded and crossed the deck, heading for the kitchen. Entering the room and places the heavy bags onto the table as he inspected each bag. 3 bags of vegetables, 1 of mixed herbs, 2 of fishman candies, 3 of seafood, and 2 bags of meat with everything checked. Thatch began to store away the seafood first. Grabbing the 3 bags, he carried them across the kitchen towards multiple steel doors. Opening one, he placed the food inside the cold fridge. Slam! Thatch jolted up, facing the entrance, but to his shock found no one standing there. Wind? Nah, there's no wind down here. Must be imagining things, he thought as returned to the task at hand. However, as his hand paused just as he was about to grab another bag, that same feeling of being watched had returned, and now it was closer. What bothered him most was that it was in his own kitchen and he couldn't see who it was. Looking around, Thatch found nothing out of place, but that feeling continued to nag him. Then an idea came to him. After all, he's the prank master of this ship. It's got to be one of his brothers trying to get back at him for one of his many tricks. He smirked. Think you can pull a fast one on me, eh? Hate to tell you this, but you're 100 years too early if you think you can prank me. Now show yourself. From the side he saw one of the chairs twitch. Thatch carefully approached one of the galley tables which said chair was at, peering down with predatory eyes as he suddenly pounced down to the floor, staring victoriously at the empty space under the table. What are you up to now, Thatch? Marco was standing at the galley entrance, spying his brother laying down on the floor, looking between his older man and the empty space, before Thatch got up while mumbling that he wasn't doing anything. Marco quirked an eyebrow at the terrible lie but left it. Instead took a seat at one of the tables. So did you find out what the commotion was about? Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. Turns out some rookie started a fight at the human shop. The interesting bit being that they took out the celestial dragons that were visiting Sabaody. This piece of information left Thatch speechless while his jaw just hung there as if his brother had just told him that all the emperors were going to have a large tea party. What? He exclaimed. Man, what were they thinking? Not that they didn't have it coming to them. But seriously, that's insane to think some newbie had some guts to go against them. Either that or a complete idiot. I hope it's the first. Their bounty will no doubt increase and all the Marines will be targeting them from now on. We'll certainly be hearing about more of the details in the newspaper. Hey, don't you think we should stick around longer then? With this amount of ships about. Pops said it was all right. Jimbei can handle it, and if he needs any help we'll send someone, Marco reassured the other, before watching Thatch walking back to the kitchen counter. What the fuck? Thatch angrily yelled, glaring at the bags sitting on the counter. When I find who it was they're going to pay. Thatch threatened. What's wrong, Thatch? What wrong? What wrong? My meat is gone, that's what's wrong. It was what I was going to cook tonight. Tonight. Yes, tonight. Do you know how hard it is to get meat at this island? Close to impossible, that's my problem. It's all gone. How can it all be gone? Damn, I bet it was the person that was hiding earlier. I knew someone was there. Why the hell are you smiling? Just the thought that one of our brothers for once got by you is actually amusing. Anyhow, I wouldn't stress over it too much. We've still got plenty in storage from shopping earlier, Marco explained. That's not the point, Thatch groaned, drooping his head. You're just upset that some was able to slip past you. It won't happen again. Somewhere on the ship, Luffy's just finished eating the tasty meat and was left nibbling on the bones. As Thatch ranted on his vengeance, Luffy had snuck past easily. He had dragged the bag down some stairs, through a corridor and into the first room he chose by naming the doors by food. He ended up choosing pork and hid in the room. How nobody saw or heard him, well, nobody will ever know. Luffy ripped the meat apart like paper with his teeth, devouring all of it at an impossible pace. Though who could blame him? It wasn't like he was well fed by that bad man, giving constant scraps. He hated the times that would starve age. Shaking his head, Luffy pushed back the horrid memories. Determined not to let it get him down, his focus back onto the task at hand, or more specifically in his hands. At a few minutes before the bag of food had been completely eaten up, not even leaving the bones since he could use his dragon's teeth to make quick work of them. Luffy patted his blown-up belly looking completely content, and rolled onto his back without a care in the world. It was nice as he listened to the various sounds. To the side, there's a porthole, but it was completely dark as the was underwater. He watched the multicolored fish swim by, quietly. Suddenly he sat up when a pair of thumbing reached his ears, drawing closer. Scrambling, Luffy spun around, but the room was completely filled with barrels. Choosing to hide in one, he moves to one. Opening a barrel, his actions are halted when he saw that it was filled with water. He was in a water store. No way was Luffy able to hide in any of the barrels. With his devil fruit he'd no doubt drown. Shutting the lid, he surveys any last possible places. There, in the corner, was another stack of barrels. However, just behind it, he spotted something. There was a rotten hole in the flooring. As the footsteps closed in, he ran to it. Luffy was sure that it was big enough for a bear cub to crawl through, so deemed it good enough for himself. Silently, he descended below the boards until he was completely swallowed by the darkness. Listening, he knew the humans were above, though their voices muffled. There was a thump and a scrap, assuming that they had just plucked a barrel and was now dragging it away. Luffy waited for the men to disappear before moving once more. It was 5 minutes till the sound started fading to nothing. Luffy released his breath. He didn't realize he was holding. Being below his eyes had adjusted to the darkness. So when shuffling around he spots an opening. Curious to explore, Luffy inched forward. For a man, it would be impossible to move through, but Luffy with his small body it was easy, especially with his devil fruit ability. His rubber body squeezing through the tight spaces and rounding the beams was no trouble. Finally, he reached the end and found that it didn't lead out. Instead, there was a box space. Moving to the center, he noted the space was large enough to fit his body and more. Though it was still dark, it had a small glow as light slipped between the boards above. But importantly, there were no hatches and it was extremely filthy, so the area had never been used. Even if it was dusty, Luffy deemed it to be cozy and warm. Yawning, he allowed his body to transform into his natural form, however not to his full size. It was obvious that Luffy had forgotten that he was wearing clothes as he was now laying in said torn clothing. The shorts had completely split from the sudden change in size, whereas the shirt was torn at the sleeves and collar but stretching around his scaly body. Luffy whined at the results, knowing that he'll be needing to find more clothes. For now, he curled up and laid his head down. And for the first time, the sound of chains didn't accompany the rocking of the ship, peacefully lulling him to sleep. A cold room, a hot coal pit, and looming figures with Cheshire Cat smiles. He felt something heavy pin him down onto his front and chains rattle as his limbs panicked. He cried as the men's dark laughter drew closer. He regretted looking over his shoulder. Standing there, one of the shadows held high a glowing iron pole before striking down. Luffy had screamed till his throat was raw, but the pain would stop. The images became erratic, changing to worse and worse images each time. Boom! Luffy opened his eyes instantly and nearly jumped up but knocked his head on the wood above. Luffy rubbed a bruised spot, though it didn't actually hurt, more out of habit. His vision was blurry due to the welled-up tears, so it was to tell where it was. But the scent of sea salt and Adam's wood relaxed him. It wasn't much, but at least there wasn't the familiar smell of blood and rusty iron. At least he wasn't there. Boom! Another rumble shook the ship, back and forth. Placing his head on the wall, Luffy heard further violent splashing and rumbles outside. It was all accompanied by the hollers of the crew and creaking of the vessel. The situation wasn't unfamiliar to Luffy. He had been in multiple sea storms before, though in his opinion this seemed to be rougher than all the others. Luffy hated it. He hated its loud voice as if roaring at him. His dislike grew even more when his so-called owner had found this out and would chain him outside in the rain. Lucky the lightning had never hit his chain. He heard many times that it hurt like crazy. Even Ace refused to fly during storms, warning Luffy that was dangerous. Whining, Luffy curled in on himself, his tail wrapping tightly as if to protect him. He blocked out the storm's cries, squeezing both eyes hoping it would end soon. It didn't, continuing on for hours, but eventually, the darkness was able to take Luffy, sheltering him from any more nightmares, allowing him to settle. Awaking once, Luffy was greeted by his warm, little space. It was different for the little dragon that he needed to think back to the prior day's events, along with his whereabouts. Snorting, Luffy flopped back down, knowing that no guard was going to disturb him, and he enjoying the peace, rolling about in his little den. On the other hand, the surface was hard, rough, and scratched uncomfortably against his scales. Even along his reptilian body a couple of scratches had appeared. Glaring down, Luffy claws at the wood a little. The last time he had a proper bed was with his brothers, which they made themselves, though he would mainly sleep on his actual brothers than their bed. Thought of a soft bed was nice, and if this was to be his hideout then it needed to be more comfortable. He nodded to himself before crawling away. Climbing out from beneath the boards, he shook his body and stretched out like a cat. Multiple pops race up his sore body and relieving the cramped muscles. Luffy left the water storeroom and casually walked back down the corridor from yesterday. He peeked behind each door, finding a sail room, cable room, and more rooms filled with barrels. One room was even dedicated to sake. Luffy reclosing the door instantly due to the strong odor overwhelming his nose. Finally, he climbed the steep stairs leading to the deck that came through the other day. Reaching the top, he inspects the outside before slithering up the last steps. There was no life to be seen. The upper deck was bare with the exception of puddles scattered about. It was still quite dark with a few sun rays seeping over. It was most likely too early, so the crew would still be sleeping, exhausted from the thunderstorm. Smiling at this, Luffy leaped across the decking and jumped playfully into the pools of water. He ran in every direction, excited to be. Raising his head, his eyes sparkled excitedly, admiring the chair that was seated in the midst of the ship. It's huge. Luffy climbed the tall armrest till he sat at the top. The blue chair was worn but soft as he kneads the material with his feet. To the side, he spots something. He morphs back to his child form, then moves to the seat and plops himself down. Now sitting in a large imprint of someone, dipping low in the seat. A giant must sit here. That's so cool. Luffy comparing his tiny form to the imprint, though he stared forward for a second. Why is it here? The view's boring. Don't they want to see the sea? Luffy quirked his head with a simple expression. His head started to strain, so he fell backward, comfortably laying on his back. The chair was cozy. He could lay there for hours watching the cloud float. Luffy blinked once, then twice. Suddenly he shot up, no taking his eyes off it. He bounced off the furniture and scuffled to the port side of the Moby's railing, pushing his head between the posts and glancing up, then down at the rushing waves that crashed upon the hull. He stared at the water questionably. Then his face strikes into recognition, finally becoming aware that they were no longer underwater. Instead, they were on the surface. The thought excited Luffy that he wanted to get a better view. Turning completely around, he bounded towards the deck's center until he was at the foot of the main mast. Luffy crouched down and swings his arm back. Kumo Gumo no. The arm stretched out impossibly high and grabbed above the main royal, causing Luffy to catapult himself amongst the white sails, only to have Luffy smack face first into the mast's top and cling onto it. But the pain quickly ebbed away at the sight of the sky-kissing ocean for as far as anyone could possibly see. It was a familiar, welcoming sight. The air glowing orange as the sun rose from its watery blanket and glittered on the sea. It was beautiful, staring out as the wind whispered across his skin and sweeping through his raven locks. Of course, it would be even better sharing this moment. Ace, Sabo. There was nothing at first, so he repeated the thought once again. There was silence. But then Luffy felt a budding warmth from the bond, though one being faster than the other. Hey, Sabo, look. It's just like back in East Blue. He smiled lovingly, never taking his eyes off the view, reminiscing with his happy memories. Just then the second presence was full awakening. And Luffy giggled. Ace was always the slower one in the mornings, thinking back to multiple times when Sabo would ask Luffy to wake him up, only for Ace to scold them, saying there were better ways to wake him than have Luffy bounce on him. His mind gradually drifted away, thinking back to what happened then. Ace, Sabo, from now on I'll live my life freely, just as promised. He solemnly smiled towards the scenery. Meanwhile, the bond tingled, his brothers reminding that they'll be doing it together. A hand gently clasps the marks. Yeah, they'd be all right. They together and are free. It had been a long time since he felt this, but that's what he felt, free. Squawk. Interrupting the chilled morning, a white bird signaled their presence. Fly towards the ship. It was an unusual bird compared to the rest, being roughly the same size as Luffy. It wore a hat and had a bag and something else strapped around to their body. Drawing closer, Luffy recognized as one of those news coups that would give those papers when one of the adults in Fuchsia village brought one. Though Luffy couldn't read, so Makino would read pieces to him, and when moving to the mountains, well, Sabo took over that, while reminding Luffy it was a good way to gather information. But Luffy was more interested in hearing about exciting stories on pirates than that. Reminiscing, he followed the animal. When the feathered creature swooped down, Luffy instantly ducked behind the mast, becoming conscious of the sudden pirate that the bird landed next to. Did he see me? He held his position for a second before peering over the side. He was aware that the stranger was facing away as he tried to exchange with the news coup. Using the opportunity, Luffy quietly drew out his claws and descended along mast on the opposing side of the pirate, so not to be seen. When touching the bottom, he's faced with a familiar door to the galley. Checking that the other was still distracted, Luffy between the door. Upon entering the room, he dived under the tables. A sweet aroma filled the room as well as the scent of a man. Weaving under the tables, Luffy checks his company. It was the puffy redhead he'd followed yesterday, gliding around the kitchen side. What was his name? Coming up blank. He nicknamed the man Beaver Hair because by Luffy's logic his hair was round and puffy looking like a beaver, not to mention it stuck out like one's tail, so Beaver Hair it was. Watching Beaver Hair, he assumed him to be a cook. Luffy's jaw hung as the other cracked eggs, chopping and mixing various bowls, creating tempting smells that Luffy just wanted to bolt over. But he held his place waiting for his moment to possibly snatch some more food, even some bacon. Not long after, the previous pirate from the deck entered. Luffy stilled, eyes following the sandaled feet as they headed for him. When they seated themselves nearby, Luffy froze, hoping the other won't feel how close he was. After he was sure that it's safe, Luffy turned away. But something had him pause, glancing to the long limbs that reeked something other than human. The smell was curious. Crawling dangerously close, Luffy sniffed. He couldn't understand what it was. He never smelt anything like it. The closest thing he could compare it to was ash. He pulled back when the legs suddenly adjusted themselves. However, Luffy, wondering about the owner of the scent, leaned slowly between the legs till he saw the stranger's face. If the man looked down right now, Luffy would certainly be seen. Observing the man, Luffy recognized him to be Beaverhead's friend. But being the one that was following them, Luffy wasn't able to get a good look at the man till now. The man carried this tired expression, his eyes drooping low, though it made the man look mature unlike the other occupant in the room. Another standing feature was his hair. Why does he have bananas on his head? But it doesn't look tasty. The thought of food suddenly caused his stomach to groan. Luffy blushed and jerked back from the man at the noise. Next hugs his midsection as to quieten it. Mark, if you want seconds you can ask. After all, how could you resist wanting more of my cooking? That wasn't me. The statement had caused everything to go silent. Marco. It was early morning when Marco stepped from his room and out onto the deck. He yawned, walking down the stairs to the rails. It like any other morning, he thought. Looking around, he sees the amount of water on deck the storm had left. It wouldn't be too good to leave it as it was, so he puts a reminder away to have a division clear it later. Who's that? He raised an eyebrow, looking upward. Upon the mainmast sat a figure. Marco wasn't able to pick out any features as they were so high up. Squawk. Marco turned as the news coup flew towards him and landed on the Moby's railing. The bird gave another caw, so he walks over to it, reaching into his pant pocket and picked out some loose bully. Slotting it into the money box strapped to the creature, he then pulled out a newspaper from its satchel. The news coup bows in gratitude and once again took off to the skies. Looking up once more, Marco found that the person had vanished, leaving an empty space. There wasn't anyone climbing down the rigging even. Did he imagine it? Rubbing his head, he passed it off that he was still drowsy from sleep. Some coffee would be nice. Marco stepped up the stairs and opened the galley door. Stepping into the room, he is greeted by the smell of breakfast. He already knows that it was Thatch in the kitchen, doing his usual routine of preparing the food before the ship started to wake. Morning, Mark, his brother greeted with his energetic smile. Marco wondered how the man had so much energy in the morning, not to mention for the rest of the day. Marco gave a brief nod in response. Coffee, please, Thatch, Marco requested, moving further into the room and seating himself down at his usual table. It wasn't long till said coffee was placed in front of him, along with a warm plate of breakfast. Another long day ahead. Thatch returned back to his preparations. Just one of those mornings, he rubbed between his eyes. After eating his food, he leaned back onto his chair with coffee in hand. As soon as he folded out the newspaper, all attention drawn in by the headlines. Rookie brothers attack celestial dragons. So there are still idiots out there willing to stand up to those bastards. Leaning over, he reads the article with interest. Fire Fist Ace and Mad Hatter Sabo cause riot at auction house situated at Dock 1 on Sabayati Archipelago. The first attack happened during the auction by the Rookie brothers, who assaulted 2 celestial dragons and released a cyclops, which was to be sold at auction that ate the remaining occupants of the room, including the royal nobles. Then the rest continued talking how hard the Marines fought to save the nobles, also that all slaves had run and that there were rewards for anyone who captures them. Marco felt slightly sorry, thinking to the poor slaves that were now on the run for the rest of their lives. There was little information on the new pirates, even how they escaped. Just that due to the amount of fire and loose cyclops, the 2 captains were able to run. They're definitely not allowing the public know how they let someone assault a celestial, much less get away with it, Marco thought. He turned a page and revealed 2 wanted posters. Spreading them out, Marco observed them both. They displayed 2 men, and from Marco guessed they were quite young as the faces stared back at him. The first with black hair and freckles. He gave off a devilish smile. While was that fire on him? A devil fruit? Marco glanced, thinks back to the article. Guess that's how he got the nickname Fire Fist. Looking to the other poster boy fitted his own nickname as well. The pirate being nicknamed as Mad Hatter by how well dressed and held himself. The blonde teen was bowing his top hat with eyes smiling evilly to the camera. Unlike the other, he presented a mature feel about him. Honestly, the 2 didn't look like brothers. The only similarity the 2 shared was the dark look, as if someone was being greeted by hell. Those eyes were deep and held so much hatred. Marco quirks his eyebrows at this. How much hatred can someone hold? Just the thought of these 2 rookies coming to the new world brought Marco to sigh. Hopefully, they won't be stupid enough to assault any of Pop's territories. What's up, Mark? Thatch calls over from his station. Just thinking about troubling youngsters and most likely be causing us more stress in the future. Marco slumped back on his chair. Keep talking like that, you'll start turning into an old geezer. Thatch snickered. By the way, Dema will be dropping by next week. Dema, be nice to see how that guy's been. Heard that he got into a bar fight then. One with a vice admiral. Can't wait to hear what happened this time. They're going to stay a few days. That'll be enough to exchange your stories. Though I'd advise you to not aggravate his companion this time. Not my fault if the ape can't take a joke. Seriously, he nearly killed me. Thatch whined, remembering his last encounter with the mammal. For shooting you he had every right. Being hammered and telling it monkey jokes probably isn't a good idea. Honestly, none of yours ever are. Marco smirked at his brother. Come on, my jokes are genius. Especially the hungry monkey story. Suddenly a rumble interrupts the 2's conversation. Assuming what it was, Thatch grins at his brother. Mark, if you want seconds you can ask. After all, how could you resist wanting more of my cooking? Marco gave his idiot brother a stern look. It wasn't me. His words silenced the room. The sound had been close, but no one else was supposed to be in the room but the 2 commanders. Surveying the room confirmed that no one had just entered. Even so, the noise had been closer than any of the entrances. His attention then focused onto all the tables surrounding them, especially at the one he was sitting. Not making sudden movement, Marco started to slip from his chair, lowering himself. Then entrance swung open, presenting a sudden presence. Morning, you 2. Entering was a character dressed in a pink kimono, a red garment with black spots wrapping their midsection, as well as having the hair and pale complexion that complete the look of a Japanese doll. Hey, Izo. Morning. The 2 greeted the 16th commander, who joined them. Marco, what are you doing down there? The man looked at him questionably, seating himself down. Marco glanced beneath the table, seeing only the legs of other seats. Nothing, the blonde commented, rising back up from the floor. Izo shrugged, satisfied with the answer, though Marco looked to Thatch, hoping he'd seen anything. Obviously not, as Thatch gave him that clueless expression. Meanwhile, in a room next door, Luffy huffed as he tried to calm his beating heart. Crap, they nearly caught me. It was a miracle that saved him. Using the distraction to escape quickly. Lucky he hadn't knocked anything as he snuck to the next door. Looking up, he's stunned. He had stepped into heaven because he was standing in the food storage room. So much food decorated the room that Luffy didn't wait. He bounded further into the tasty forest, grabbing and eating anything he could reach, and that was everything. The food was disappearing so fast, almost like magic. The show only stopped till he filled his black hole. Once finished, he checked the porthole and door and found that most of the ship was awake, meaning that he was stuck. But this was Luffy and refused to stay still. Time passed till he spots a vent in the wall. Pulling off the screen, without faulting, climbed through. Luffy was unable to see the end but kept on. Reaching the first exit, he observed through the screen. The room was dim, so he was unable to see clearly but made out roughly that it was a bedroom. Seeing there's no movement, Luffy slowly crept out from the hiding spot. Getting a better look of the room, Luffy saw that it was a fine room painted with white walls and yellow trim, and the furniture was simple but looked well crafted. As he continued to gradually explore the area, his eyes landed on a cloth, a giant white one hanging from a wall, and looking at it an idea crossed Luffy, suddenly wanting the item. When stepping towards it, the floor creaked into the silence. There was a loud snore, directing Luffy's attention to a bed. A bulky form laid on it, snoring that could be compared to an elephant's, though the man must have been bigger than one. Luffy assumed the man was sick cause of all the various tubes and machines he was attached to. But despite all the equipment, Luffy still sensed that this man was incredibly strong. Careful not to disturb the giant, Luffy kept low to the floor and reached for the cloth. Touching it was thick and worn yet pleasantly soft, just like the chair had been. When yanking it, he gave a silent gasp as the cloth fell, cloaking his form in white. Luffy shuffled under the fabric before finally popping his head out the edge. He glanced once more to the bed, finding the man had rolled but was still asleep. Happy he hadn't awoken the human, Luffy carried the item, retreating to the vent with it dragging along behind him. His mission complete, Luffy vanished into the walls. A while later, Marco knocked on the cabin door, patiently waiting outside. He heard some shuffling before the door opened, watching his captain stepping out into the morning sun. "Morning, Pops," Marco smiled, stepping aside for him to pass. Pops casually walked by towards the captain's chair. As Marco followed, he observed his father. Something was off. The man wasn't attached to his ivs or pulling any along like he should do, but that wasn't anything new. Though, Pops would get scolded by the doctor again. But wasn't it? Going through a checklist, it then slapped Marco in the face. So obvious. "Pops, you not wearing your coat?" "Yeah, it appears I misplaced it. Wasn't in my room." The comment surprised Marco. It wasn't like his father to lose his things, much less his coat, as he always kept it on, hardly taking it off. "I'll have some members search for it," Marco responded. "Don't stress too much about it. It'll turn up eventually." Whitebeard lowers into his personal chair. However, settling down, his hand brush over something. Lifting his hand slightly, he notices a few tears in the armrest. Seems that things keep on happening this morning. Fingers feeling along the tears. "Son, we'll be needing to replace this chair. I'll add it to the list." Whitebeard nodded in appreciation. Unbeknownst to the Whitebeard Pirates, their new little passenger was settling down below them in his tiny den. Luffy snuggling into the captain's coat as his new nest. Thatch was going crazy, he was sure of it. No doubt about it, the food was going missing. He was sitting in the galley with multiple sheets spread across the table. It was the 5th time checking them, and still, the results were the same. Eyes glared at the papers, wishing them to burn up. But no such luck, just the inscription laughing back at him, mocking him. It had been 5 days since he'd fully stocked up at Fishman Island. 5 days, and somehow they had gone through a quarter of their food supply. I didn't make sense. By his calculations, it should only be an eighth. So what's happened to the other half? The amount of food going missing was enough to feed his seeking. At this rate, they'd have to reschedule for another restock within the next few weeks. Even the elephant tuna is gone. Thatch face-palmed the table, a miserable air clouding over him. He silently cried into the surface while thinking about the missing food. It had all started when his first bag of meat had been snatched behind his back. He groaned. Just the memory annoyed him. "I swear when I catch them, I'll hang them by their thumbs from the ship after I've beaten the life out of them." It wasn't so much he was upset by the amount of food being consumed, though he's in denial that amount of food is being consumed by one member unless one of his brother's stomachs had suddenly turned into an endless pit. No, it wasn't the amount that was bothering him, just that someone was actually stealing the food instead of asking him for more. That hurt his pride as a chef, the thought that he was completely failing to satisfy the crew's hunger and were now resorting to thievery. Why? To top it off with a cherry, he had no clue who the blasted thief was. Everyone was being themselves and all looked happy after each meal. At one point he made an announcement over dinner, yelling if anyone was still hungry to come to him. Still nothing. Thatch was running low on ideas. "Hello, Thatch." Looking over to the man, saw Izo entering. He felt an unwelcoming chill as the newcomer seated himself in front of him with a wide smile directed right at him. Thatch wasn't liking the strange smile that he was receiving. Alarm bells were ringing in his head. Oh crap, don't tell me he's found out about his latest prank. Thatch started to sweat as he subtly shifted to the nearest exit. "Don't even think about it," Izo warned, continuing to smile. "You know why I'm here, Thatch." "I have no idea what you're talking about." I'll cut to the chase. Various things have been disappearing, causing rumors of a ghost to spread. Honestly, it's starting to get on the crew's nerves. Even Vista's top hat has gone. He's quite upset about that. I'll give this ghost some credit to how they pulled that off, but now he just looks incomplete without it. By the way, you owe me my berries from the bet. Vista wasn't hiding any baldness. Thatch had become a mixture of feelings now. One being surprised the small news and was now curious to see the fifth commander without his hat. Secondly was annoyance, as he inwardly groaned thinking about money. It's not like he wasn't willing to pay, just that he didn't exactly have any since he played cards with the damn pineapple head. Then thirdly and mainly confusion to him over as he'd listened to the other. What's this got to do with me? Thatch quirked a brow. Thatch, if I believed these rumors I wouldn't be sitting here. Izo reached into his kimono. Not when I know the said ghost is right in front of me. Then Izo pulled out one of his pistols, pointing it at his target. Whoa, wait, Thatch instantly raised his hands in defense. Now I'm going to ask nicely, Thatch, return them. Izo continued after Thatch denied it was him. I put up with a lot of your pranks, but by now you should know better than to touch my things. I'll ask once more, return my kimonos. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a more precarious position. Got it, Izo, it's not me, I swear. I'm not fooling for that again, Thatch. We've known each other too long. Listen, Izo, I admit and take pride in my pranks, but this time, it's not me. Izo just continued to stare at him, not lowering the gun. I promise on my pompadour that I'm innocent. Those words seemed to have convinced Izo since he put his pistol away. Really, it's ridiculous that we only know when you're serious when you put your hair on the line. Izo relaxed back into his seat. It's nice to know how much trust there is between us. Thatch acted like he was hurt, though really he was slightly proud for being known as the ship prankster, especially when he saw the reactions from his brothers. But no way was he going to take to blame for another fellow prankster. Maybe I'm getting framed, Thatch thought. As much as love my hobby, I haven't pulled one for the past week. Have my own thief to catch. I do recall Marco saying you got outdone recently. Izo got up and maneuvered around to the kitchen, brewing his usual herbal tea. But you're still having a little trouble. A little trouble. At this rate, we'll need to dock again about the end of the month or we'll starve. Thatch returned to his gloomy self. What the hell? How'd that happen? If I knew that I wouldn't be having this problem. I've tried everything. None of the locks worked either. I'm running out of ideas. Thatch explained. Izo smiled down at Thatch, slightly entertained. So you're surrendering. Like hell I have. The day that I give up on anything is the day I dye my hair blonde. Thatch bolted up, slamming his fist down as to demonstrate his determination. Izo meanwhile hummed as his brother ranted, making his herbal tea from the kitchen. But you still have no clue who done it. Thatch collapsed back down, his gloom cloud shadowing him once more. You're so enjoying putting me down. You're getting as bad as Mark, you know that. Watching as Izo sat in front of him. I'll take that as a compliment. Izo sipped his drink. Afterward, noticed that Thatch was staring at him weirdly. He was going to ask what was wrong but shook it off. So what are you going to do? Put a giant mouse trap down? Like anyone is ridiculous enough to fall for that. Thatch had been relieved that Izo hadn't noticed he'd messed with his herbs or he'd be full of holes by now. Not the best timing to reveal that he'd swapped them with sting nettles. Thatch thought about Izo's words. Next his eyes jumped, staring at his brother with a sly grin. Not exactly, Thatch stated. Where's Blenheim? On the lower decks below the forecastle. Why? Izo becoming suspicious. Going to be borrowing some of his tools. Thatch replied, prancing out of the galley. Damn, I'm not liking where this is going. Izo huffed. Knowing that the idiot would certainly cause more trouble than good, he decided it would best for him to stay away from Thatch for the rest of the day. Marco. Hours had passed and the ship had settled to slumber. The decks were quiet and dark all for except a certain first commander's cabin, the room being lit up by a lantern. While Marco hunched over his desk with tired eyes. It was another one of his late nights stuck doing paperwork. However, the reports and complaints had grown recently on various items were going missing. Things including Pop's coat that they'd yet to find as well, which was another mystery in itself as it's not like the giant coat was hard to miss. Hopefully, it didn't go overboard in the last storm. If it doesn't turn up soon we might have to get another one, Marco thought. Though was wishing that wouldn't be the case after all. Pops had that before his prime. Would be a shame if it was gone after all those years. Then there these strange reports from various divisions, explaining sightings of glowing eyes at night and strange noises. This had caused a few members to say that the ship was now haunted. Was he seriously dealing with reports about ghosts? Marco slouched back in his seat, hand over his eyes. However, he felt something sticky as he massaged between his eyes. Opening them, Marco inspected his hands. They were sore from the constant writing and there were splotches of ink on his fingertips. He realized that he had most likely just rubbed it onto his face, causing Marco to groan. He should go wash that off. With that thought he decided to take a break from his desk and left the room. Being the middle of the night left the corridors cold and stark, Marco's only footsteps being the only sound as he strolled along the creaking boards. Not long later he entered and crossed the galley to the kitchen. Maneuvering through the darkness he stood before the sink and rinsing the ink away. He was washing his face, the cool water splashing against the rough skin, his tired, sore eyes feeling a small relief. Then, bump, Marco slightly jolted. Turning around he glanced over the room. but found nothing out of place. Composing himself, he then raised his hand, lighting it up by his devil fruit ability, and inspected his surroundings. Blue flames lick over the hand while giving the room a warm glow. His cautious movements had led him further into the kitchen. Then there was another crash. Marco swiftly faced the source. He was now standing in front of the storeroom. Was someone in the storage room? Marco doubted that would be the case considering the time. Then again, it could be Thatch's food thief. He crossed his arms, thinking whether to lock the door and wake Thatch to deal with them or just confront them himself. Marco pondered the thought for a second before deciding the latter option was probably better, though he was tired and now had to scold and punish the unfortunate soul. But it was better than leaving it to the other commander. More than likely Thatch would go overboard, causing more stress for Marco later. Silently he approached the door and reached for the knob. Gripping it, he zoned into the various shuffles before briskly pushing the door open. But there was a click and a clang, then suddenly everything went black and Marco slammed to the ground. The man groaned in pain, clutching his head as the dizziness faded from his mind. Afterward, he realized that his face was covered in something. Sitting up, he wiped the substance away from his eyes, which didn't help very much. When Marco opened his eyes, his body froze at what he was faced with. Tar. That's what filled his vision. There was tar covering his entire body, but if the worst part was that this mess that seeped into places he didn't know he had and would take hours to wash off him, then it certainly was the mass amount of feathers sticking to him. His shock sparked to complete rage when he spotted the trap that was just above the door he had entered from. The dots quickly connect. Thatch. It was no longer a peaceful night, especially as a certain fourth commander cried out in terror. Thatch. Pain was an understatement to what was feeling right now. Marco had not held back one bit since he had been tar and feathering. If anything, Marco had gone beyond, whacking every part of his body, so now his body had felt like he'd been trampled by a giant, maybe even as far as Or's Jr. Not to mention his night clothes, he had been sleeping and getting burned. Thatch was absolutely dying. He cringed thinking back to his own beating. It was hell, and now Marco had stuck him on cleaning duty for the next month. Thatch whined as he made his way through the ship, though avoiding the first commander as much as possible. Lucky he was let off breakfast duty earlier since his body was refusing to move this morning. But now he would have to do lunch. Reaching his destination, he carefully peered in, finding the galley with a few crew members about. He spotted the small group of commanders and walked up to them. Noting it, Izo was sitting with Haruta, the smallest of the crew, and Jazu, who was a large, bulky man. Marco's not here, is he? Thatch continued to check the room, expecting an assault any second. If he was, I think you'd be kicked back through that door by now, Haruta commented. Thatch was still hesitant but tries to relax and continued into the galley. So why was Marco looking like an enraged basilisk earlier? Izo smiled at Thatch over his fan. Thatch mumbles something, but the two just lean towards him. HM, what was that? It wasn't my fault. That Mark set off my trap for the thief. You made the ridiculous thing, so of course, it's your fault. Izo deadpans. Ridiculous. It was a master plan. Thatch defended. Made by you. Izo pointed at him. His brother could be so mean. Thatch pouted. What's that supposed to mean? It worked, didn't it? On the wrong person, Jazu spoke again. Attention turned to Haruta, who had been witnessing the ordeal. What was Marco doing in the storeroom? He said something about hearing someone inside. Thatch's explanation gradually slowed, eyes starting to widen when the words hit him. No. He dashed from his spot, leaving his brothers to stare after him, who decided then to follow. Thatch entered the storeroom quickly, avoiding the tar, and making his way in further till he saw the real crime scene. No, damn it. Curse the souls of Davy Jones' locker. Thatch gripped his head and stomped like a mad monkey, though quickly collapsed to his knees cause of his aching body. What happened? Haruta came into the room followed by Izo and Jazu. When discovering the mess of food that looked like a small cyclone had been through, they could guess what was wrong. Forget Marco, I'm the true victim here. They got in again. Grab and dashed. Thatch's rant was eventually interrupted by Jazu giving a deep cough. What is it, Jazu? Oh, well, Marco entered because he heard someone inside, right? Everyone nodded in response, expecting him to continue. Then how did the thief get in, without triggering Thatch's trap? Jaws dropped at that point. Why the hell had they not picked that up? There wasn't another entrance to the room, and during the night the door was booby-trapped, and later Marco had blocked it after triggering, so the thief no way could have gotten past him. So how did they get in and out? Wait a minute. Thatch face-palmed. Jazu, over there. Slide that crate to the side. Jazu gave a curt sure, then moved to the crate Thatch was pointing to. It sat near the back but not against the wall. With ease the third commander moved the crate, revealing to the others a small vent. Suddenly Izo slapped Thatch up the head. Oh, what was that for? You knew there was vents in here and didn't consider them. Of course not. Thatch groaned, rubbing his sore head. All right. Thatch turned serious, then pointed to one of his brothers. Haruta, start crawling. Go die. Haruta instantly rejected, glaring at his brother. Stop joking about my height. I'm not that small. Really think about it, Thatch. If he can't fit in that, then no way is anyone else going to. What's that supposed to mean? The smaller commander growled out. He means no offense, Haruta, but you do admit that you're the smallest of the crew. Aizo spoke, which made the boy grumble in annoyance and crossed his arms. Afterward, Aizo turned to Thatch. So your thief turned out to be an actual rat. No way is that just a rat, guys. It eats way too much for that to be the case. A giant rat, Jazu suggested. Whatever it is, you still need to catch it, Thatch. I don't want a disease spreading cause a rat was on our ship. A while later, Thatch, what are you doing down there? Namor was looking at his brother suspiciously. The Red was crouched down behind a crate, though he was constantly looking over the top. SHHHH. Thatch signaled with his finger to his lips before waving him over with a grin. You haven't pranked anyone, have you? The Fishman asked, not wanting to get involved with one of the man's schemes. But Thatch just repeated his previous actions. Namor inwardly groaned, but he was curious to Thatch's behavior, so he moved toward the man sitting behind him. If you're still hiding from Marco, I won't save you. That's not it, though I won't be jumping in front of him anytime soon. Thatch whispered, then care to explain why we're both now sitting here with you grinning like a crazy madman? Thatch replied by gesturing to the rope in his hand. Namor's eyes followed the rope and noticed it trailing away from them and ending about a meter away on the other side of the crate, which it was tied to a stick that held up smaller crate over a plate of mixed vegetable. The situation clicked in Namor's mind, but then raised a brow. You're adult, he stated. That's hurtful. Thatch figure slouched from the abrupt insult. You really think that's going to trick any animal? It does, Thatch said in a harsh whisper. For a moment he pouted at Namor for doubting his idea before returning to his usual smile. First, I've sealed all the vents to the food storage rooms, galley and kitchen hours ago. No way has it or going to get in there again. By now that rat will be starving and will walk right into my trap. I used these kinds of traps a lot when I was a kid along with various others. With my wits I could become a brilliant hunter. Namor critically stared at his brother. What is it? You got a problem with my genius? Thatch snapped. Just 3 things why I highly doubt things'll fail. Namor held up a finger. First, the animal has to be really dumb to fall for that trick. Secondly, it's the middle of the day. Everyone's out on deck, so have to be desperate to come. He gestured to the many members weaving across the ship. Then Namor pointed to the food. Thirdly, and more importantly, didn't you say that it was mainly meat being eaten? You're using the wrong bait. Thatch was dumbstruck. He blinked once, then twice. Shit, Thatch exclaimed, getting up and disappearing to the galley. Namor shook his head in aspiration. His so-called brother could be so empty-headed. He watched as Thatch rushed back with the new bait, a string of sausages. Why sausages? It's the only cheap meat left. I am not willing to sacrifice anything else for the rat's last supper. Thatch crouched down to swap the bait. Then his body stiffened. Thatch, what's wrong? Namor asked, but the other shushed him and pressed his head against the wall. Thatch smiled, looking to his company. It's here. Crouching lower, he placed the new bait further to the vent than it was before. Come on, take the nice bait. You shouldn't tease animals, Thatch, much less a hungry one. Karma will come back to bite you. Thatch turned and reassured Namor that he knew what he was doing until he found the sausages were quickly being lead and devoured into the vent. Eyes widened. When did that happen? The two thought. Oh no, you don't. Before the food could slip away, Thatch leaped for it, thudding to the wooden floor, but he was able to snatch the end while it continued to pull. Now it looked like the chef was having a tug of war with the floor, and if that was weird enough, then Thatch losing said floor certainly was. Crew members watched the strange situation, some not believing what they were actually seeing while others cheered their brother on. Come on, Commander. Thatch couldn't hear the voices surrounding him as he pulled harder on the meat. What on earth is it? And why was he having trouble? Eventually, most of the crew had gathered to watch, even some of the commanders, including Marco, who was curious about the strange situation. Thatch then yelps as he's abruptly downwards and smacking his face into the floor. Thatch! Everyone called out in worry and shock as they just watched their brother high-fiving the floor with full power. They released a small sigh of relief as Thatch turned his head, giving off a reassured smile. Don't worry, I've still got it, he said, now on the floor with one of his arms in the hole, still gripping onto the food. You idiot, just let go. Aizo yells, even more irritated that he even bothered to worry about his moron of a brother. No way, I'm going to win this, Thatch declared. Says the guy who's got his arm stuck in the floor, Namor bluntly stated. I think Aizo right. You've already lost, Marco smirked. Shut up, I've got this, all right. As Thatch continued to pull on the meat, he felt something brushing against his hand a few times. Guessing what it probably was caused Thatch to grin. Making a decision, he gets ready. Thatch knew he had to do this right, especially as he can only use one hand at the moment. So quickly he gave a strong tug and the feeling returned. Swiftly he exchanged his hand from bait to culprit, causing a loud yelp to come from under the floorboards. Smug, Thatch looked to his brothers and began to pull out the food thief. See, told you I'd W. A scream tore through Thatch's throat. His arm is yanked back into the hole, slamming his face once again. What wrong? Izo urgently asked, him and Marco running to Thatch, who looked in extreme pain. Hovering over Thatch, they saw a minor nosebleed from hitting the ground, and the fourth commander clenching his shoulder that was buried in the decking with his other hand. That motherfuck, get it off. Get it off. Now. Thatch gritted his teeth, feeling no doubt were teeth tearing into his arm by the searing pain and wetness that was dripping down his skin. Or maybe that was his own blood. He let out another striking yell, trying to move only to have the teeth dig down harder. What the fuck is it? Oh God, I hope I don't lose my arm. Thatch was cursing and yelling so much it was alarming everyone. They really needed to do something. Move your head slightly, Thatch. I'll shoot through the boards, Izo directed, pulling out his pistols and aiming at the floorboards. Have you lost it? My arm is still in there. Thatch yelled in horror. His arm was already being bitten but now had the chance of getting shot as well. No way in hell. He was quite attached to his arm. Thank you very much. What are we supposed to do? Get Marco to kick the floor in? Same problem. Thatch yelled once more. He tried to glare at Izo, but the small movement resulted in more pain. Thatch, don't antagonize it. Just relax your arm. Play dead. Numer instructed, from the side. Easy for you to say. One problem. I can't. Why not? Do you want us to get Vista to cut your arm off? No, but if I relax my arm it'll run away. Huh, that was unexpected. The crew was stunned and some slightly confused. However, the commanders were now looking at Thatch with irritation. Was Thatch really insinuating that? Are you saying? Namor looking dumbfounded, but before he could finish Marco had interrupted. Thatch, are you still holding it? Yes, as if I'd love. The sentence faded as Thatch saw the dark glare he was receiving from the towering brothers as well as many other disbelieving eyes directed at him. You, complete idiot. Let it go. Izo screeched angrily. Fearing his brothers, Thatch released his grip and the results were instant as the sharp teeth disappeared from his arm leaving a dull pain. Slowly he carefully lifted his arm out. As soon as it was he leaned against Marco tiredly and all eyes widened when they saw the damage. A mess was an understatement. There were multiple rips in the skins like a rabid dog had a go at it, and it had to be deep due to the huge amount of blood seeping out. Thatch was tired from the blood loss. Hopefully, no nerves had been permanently damaged or Thatch will be struggling to use that hand again. Get the head doctor, Marco called, before supporting Thatch's twitching arm. Don't move it, the blonde comforted his brother. Wasn't planning to. Thatch groaned as the other continued to stare at the wound a bit closer. What the hell was on their ship? Ran through Marco's head. Ace and Sabo. However, somewhere across the sea were the Spade Pirates, docked on an inhabitant island. The crew unwind all the stain that had built up from just being cached by the Marines, crossing into the new world and toughing through insane storms that were more impossibly insane than they had ever witnessed. The pirates had called for a barbecue on the beach and were now enjoying food and drink to their heart's content, while the two captains of to the side, watching the party from their seats on the edge of the forest. The two had been discussing on what to do next. So which needle are we following next? Ace asked. Do you have to ask? Sabo leaned on the large tree, crossing his arms. When Ace didn't respond he decided to continue. We'll follow the third needle. That's the same direction as the pull. The journey may take a few days, so I'll send some members to search this island for food. Ace responded by humming. There was a pause before Ace spoke. Have you decided what you want to soon? I was thinking maybe we could at this time since we weren't able to before after being chased. Ace waited for a response. When he received none he looked up. Seeing the blonde face become puzzled he started to laugh. You forgot. It's your birthday coming, Sabo. Oh, that was it. Sabo was surprised by the words and started to blush. It had completely slipped his mind. It wouldn't be long till he was 17 like Ace. Honestly, neither of the two had been fond of celebrating their birthdays before. It was only when Luffy came along that they started to enjoy the special occasion. So what do you want to do? The next island is supposed to be a spring island filled with giant boars, so we would be able to do it. You sure? Yeah, I will be able to do the tradition Lu made for us, especially since we weren't exactly able to do it on yours. Ace returned the smile Sabo shone. Afterward, he picked up the straw hat hanging off his back and placed it on his lap. Looking at his companion, Sabo smirked. Ace had been a lot more mellow recently. Sabo puts it down to the welcoming warmth they've been feeling inside them. Though Sabo knew that his kin more than likely hadn't noticed how much he changed the past few days and would probably deny it. Sabo continued to observe Ace in silence until the raven gave out a breathy chuckle. It's nice to seeing you being so mirthful. What's the occasion? Raising his cowboy hat, Ace gave him a surprised look, not expecting the sudden question. Ace then relaxed once more in his spot, turning his gaze over to the sparse ocean that stretched before them. Nothing special, just remembering the time when we first met Lu. How much has changed? Ace's hand unconsciously peeing the straw hat in his lap. You mean when you came back running to me with a toddler chasing after you? Sabo eyes follow, enjoying the all too familiar sight that always brought them peace and fond memories. One being him and Ace being stunned by the toddler. that their adoptive grandfather had dropped off, who had trekked after Ace like a chick. He was so persistent, trailing wherever I went. He never did understand the words personal space. If I remember correctly, it wasn't long before it was the other way round. You started doting on him, being all protective, freaking out if he wasn't in sight. Your brother complex definitely got out of hand more than I can count. What are you talking about? I had everything under control, says the brother who would attack anyone that would look at Lou. Sabo pointed out, causing Ace to pout. I didn't do anything wrong. Those guys were giving him those filthy eyes. No way am I going to let some perverts touch our innocent little brother. Also, stop with the accusations. It's not like you're any better. True, but the difference is that I was able to handle everything, without forming or snarling at every human that came near our brother. TCH, Ace crossed his arms. Your methods are just as terrifying. Ace grumbled. Hearing the words brought some satisfaction. Though his skills were shady, he was happy as long as it meant he could protect his family. A calm moment passed between them as they're lulled by the sounds of the waves and the drunken cheers of their small crew. Thinking about it now, that's how it's always been. Attracting the wrong attention wherever he ran. He never could stay out of trouble for a minute. So of course, I worry if he's not in sight. Ace's voice turned somber. Ace, Sabo's voice was stern but calm. It was obvious where Ace's thoughts were leading. Looking up to him, Ace saw the blonde wearing a gentle smile. Ace safe. Remember, this is Lou we're talking about. Our hatchling. When we see him, he's still going to be that crazy ball of energy with that smile he always has. How can you be so sure? Now he's out there all alone. What if? Ace's body began to tremble. What about everything that happened? Ace continued to stare out to the ocean, while Sabo glanced to him then sighed. Sabo knelt down in the sand. He removed his cravat and unbuttoning his shirt. This is how. Next, he reached and grabbed Ace's hand before gently held over Sabo's own bond marks. Ever since the day we formed this bond, that moment I took the name of D, I have felt both of you through this bond. Your feelings, your pain, and your life. I know our brother is fine because I sense his happiness radiate in me. Sabo then covered Ace's own marks with his other hand. Have faith in our hatchling. Don't forget we raised him to be strong. Thanks, Sabo. Ace gave genuine smile. It's all right. Someone has to babysit you. Sabo released their hands as he stood back up. Babysit? I'm older than you. In response, the other pinched the freckled face before walking off and returning to get some food. Only physically, dear brother. Sabo chuckled, hearing his kin complaints from behind him. Honestly, Ace will never learn to grow up, in a way that made Sabo happy as he liked being the smarter one out of them. Sabo was halfway across the beach when his body jerked and collapsed. He howled in agony. He violently struggled while gripping his shoulder. It burned so much that a bolt of lightning must have struck him. His throat released chilling scream as another bolt surged through him and gripping his heart. Gritting his teeth through the pain, Sabo forced his trembling body to face his kin. Oh shit, not now. Sabo cursed at the horrible timing as he tried to focus on the other fallen figure. Ace's situation was no different. Feeling the strike, his body had instantly dropped while hollering in pain. Seeing their captains collapse, the crew ran over to aid them with calls of concern. Wait. All movement halted, looking to one of the captains. They watched as Sabo held a trembling hand out to them. There was violent coughing before Sabo spoke again. No one move. He rose, bearing through the pain, and walked toward his fallen brother, still holding his collar protectively. When he kneeling next to his body, Sabo saw the horrible effects the torture was having on him. Ace's body was curled tightly on his side as he too covered his scars instinctively. He was suffering so much that he had bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. Ace, look at me, Sabo panted, then huddled his kin close, trying to make the other more comfortable. Ace didn't respond. He called once more, but still nothing. Sabo didn't want to hurt Ace right now, but he needed a better look as a certain worry nagged him. Leaning in, he tilted Ace's face up at him. Damn it, Sabo cursed. Ace's face was covered in patches of scales, and slowly spreading over the rest of his body. The worst bit was when Sabo checked his eyes. They had already changed its dark color to a vibrant gold, and the pupils had started to thin like snake eyes. This is bad. He's losing it really fast. He needed to do something quick. Not only would everyone see, but Ace will kill their crew. Sabo turned to the crew, though hiding Ace's condition away. Fortunately, everyone had listened to him and stayed their distance, so he knew that no one saw anything. Everyone on the ship and sailed to the other side of the island. He told them with a hard expression. Some members were hesitating, glancing between themselves as they were reluctant to leave their captains in their state. That's an order. The words had instant effect as every member moved, rushing away. Once Sabo saw them disappear, he returned to his brother. Ace, listen, you're fine, calm down. Sabo panted, finally feeling the pain fade into a throbbing ache. It's not fine. Ace roared at him. Instantly Sabo backed away, wary as Ace moved to get up. He wasn't worried that he would hurt him, but right now Ace needed the space. Still, he needed to watch and reassure his brother. It's okay, Luffy's all right. You're wrong. Someone is touching our bond. They're hurting Luffy right now, Ace growled out, fists tightening at his sides. Ace caw. No, I won't calm down, Sabo. Some shitty humans have our Lu and we're not there. We're letting him down. Ace stormed off down the beach. I'll rescue Luffy and kill every forsaken human that laid a hand on our hatchling, and burn the ones that get in my way. Right then his path is blocked by Sabo. He tried to go round him but the other blocked him again. Move, Ace glared. Don't do it, Ace. Sabo became stern as he stared down Ace. Move, Sabo. But Sabo stood his ground, refusing to give. Luckily Ace had yet to fully transform or he'd be gone by now, though the black scales were covering most of his body. His dragon wings formed behind him and his long tail was swaying about angrily. Honestly, if someone saw him now they would no doubt mistake Ace for a demon. But Sabo wasn't afraid of the sight. Where are you going to go? We don't know how far he is, only the direction he's in. Think, Ace, you won't be able to fly that long. You'll exhaust yourself through those storms, and what if you fell into the sea? Sabo tried to remind him of the risks. You won't change my mind, Sabo. I am going to find them and kill them. Sabo needed to be careful or Ace would unthinkingly fly off to find Luffy. Though that would be easier for him, but he didn't want to waste time searching for Ace and find that the idiot is still in a foul mood after destroying any unfortunate being that crossed his path. Last time that happened he'd taken out a marine base, resulting in raising the bounty. There was only one option. Knock some sense into him. Damn your thick-headedness. I was wishing it wouldn't come down to this. The blonde removed and tossed his black jacket, top hat and gloves to the sand. His eyes became shadowed as he rolled up his sleeves intimidatingly slowly, his eyes starting to glow. I'm sorry, Ace. Yellow scales revealing themselves across his body and claws formed on both hands, looking at his brother determinedly. He crouched low to the ground like a tiger ready to attack. ... But I think you need to cool your head. Suddenly they both lunged. Ace and Sabo. Many trees torn from the ground. Cliffs crumbled in an intense heat that could turn the sand to glass. It had been half an hour since their fight had begun. Half an hour of exchanging punches, kicks, basically anything they could physically exchange. Now Ace's tail quickly swung round, destroying a boulder as Sabo ducked to the ground. The rock shattered, raining upon them. Sabo, waiting no time, quickly hit them in midair, transforming them to cannonballs, shooting at Ace. However, Ace bolted towards the oncoming fire and to Sabo. The rocks hit, but didn't stop, phasing through his body of fire, not bothering him. There was a piece heading right for his head. He was about to ignore it like the rest, but something was off. His eyes widened as it got closer, too close. Luckily, he dodged to the side as it came, instead hitting the sand. He looked to it, then to Sabo, to the weapon he held. From inspection he confirmed what the object was: Sabo's pipe cape. Of course, Sabo's pipe was no ordinary. After all, this is the Grand Line, filled with devil fruit users. So obviously Sabo's pipe was made of Kairoski. That smart bastard. Ace raised his hand. Heiken. Sabo was slightly disappointed that his plan hadn't worked out. Seeing Ace's signature move, Sabo surveys around him, only to discover he had no cover. Damn. So he spun his pipe in front of him at incredible speed, like a propeller. It seemed to work as the fire hit off his weapon, but the fire was increasing and started to heat up the metal in his hands, overwhelming him. Then the fire engulfed him. It seemed like forever for the fire to dissipate. In real time it was only minutes, revealing Sabo's huddled in black form. His clothes were just about no more, only leaving in what were boxers but were hardly holding together themselves. Standing up, Sabo peered down, growling at more off his clothes being ruined. You're paying for that one, Sabo informed, thinking how he'll now need to buy more clothes again. He wiped the soot off his body, revealing his yellow scales that had protected him. That's all you care about, isn't it? It's just damn clothes, Ace exclaimed, going in for a right hook. What are you blabbering about now? Sabo leapt back. Don't play dumb. We're supposed to be brothers, yet all this time you act like Lu is second priority. Even at the auction when you came out you were so calm. How could you, after see that thing? Knowing that they used that on him makes my blood boil. I wish I had killed every single of those damn Marines, but no. You didn't even shed a tear and even dragged us out of there. Ace stroked another punch which to a stunned Sabo. Even now you halt me. Why? His rage blinding him that he was unaware of the dark swirling aura shadowing around Sabo. Have you stopped, Car? Suddenly Sabo uppercutted Ace in the jaw and lifting him into the quickly followed it by a jab to the chest, knocking the wind out of Ace and slamming his body backwards into the then clambered on top of Ace, pinning him down by the shoulders. The two continued to struggle, but Sabo held his position, caging Ace, further angering the beast. You don't care what happens anymore, Ace finally screamed. As soon as the words left him, everything froze. The fog cleared Ace's mind, leaving to realize what he'd just said, and witnessing the effect it had. A statue of Sabo loomed over him, still, heavy, and now lifeless. Ace couldn't measure the amount of regret he felt right then, watching the dark aura shrouding Sabo, the gradual trembling of the hands gripping him, but most of all he regretted causing those blue eyes to look down on with such sadness. Sabo, of course I damn well care. You think you're the only one that's worried? Sabo yelled, tears start to weld in his eyes. You think I'm calm? How can I be calm when our hatchling isn't here without us? Or when I can feel the pain you're in? Do you even realize how I feel every time you fly off, wondering if you're alright, if I'll see you again soon, but most of all that I won't be there for you, that I'll fail you again? Sabo's whole body trembled, tears splashing down onto Ace's face. That day haunts me non-stop. The ash, the blood, finding you in that. Sabo, stop. Ace quickly sat up, hugging his kin firmly. However, Sabo shook his head, shrugging off Ace's comforting warmth. Ace wanted to reach out when Sabo got up, but his body hadn't listened, leaving him to watch his brother stumble away. As the distance grew, so did the guilt. He looked at his clawed hand with self-loathing. He had just raised his hand to his kin with the intent to harm. WHT was he thinking? He had hurt Sabo, and now because of his own selfishness he'd lost Sabo. He punched the sand. Shit. Marco. It's been a while since Marco had rushed Thatch to the infirmary, followed by the nurses forcing him out. This whole time without any news on their brother's condition. Usually he hardly worried about his family when they're sent to the dock. Being tough as nails, he knew that they'll be fine. However, this time that bite clung to his memory. He hadn't had a good look at it, but it was enough to worry Marco, and time wasn't helping, just building his concerns. Many others had approached him, especially Thatch's 4th Division panicked after hearing their commander was injured. Those closer to the commander were even tearing up. Of course there were rumors. After all, it's impossible, even for a large ship such as the Moby Dick, and when so many had witnessed it. Rumors spread like a disease, infecting the crew with each word. But like all gossip, the further it stretched, the more it had been altered. Marco groaned. It was time like these that most of the crew would swarm him, thus a headache was starting to form from all the voices. Marco had corrected and reassured those who approached him about the subject. He found his brother's imaginations to be ridiculous. At times he heard about a stowaway reaping revenge due to Thatch messing with their woman. These were the most realistic and believable ones. But then there were the strange and inconceivable ones. At one point someone asked, is Thatch safe? Has someone really turned cannibal? How did they end up with that one? Sure, the food was deceasing, but not enough that they were in danger, especially cannibalism. Things definitely get out of hand when their family got protective. Now a lot are wanting to find the attacker. He wouldn't mind joining, but being the 1st Division commander, he couldn't let his feelings fog his judgment. Right now an unknown and possibly dangerous animal are on board, and he couldn't let the situation get any worse by allowing to search for it. Otherwise more members will no doubt be joining Thatch. Rickon, Mainolum. Marco called out to 2 of his division members standing nearby, whom immediately rushed over to him. I need you both to gather the commanders with Pops for a meeting. Also inform each one to hold off their division on looking for the attacker. He saw the confusion they founded from that last sentence, but listened anyhow, trusting Marco's leadership. Luffy, meanwhile far beneath the floorboards, was Luffy in his dragon form. He panted heavily from the race he'd achieved back to his nest. His little body trembled from the exhaustion and shock. He felt his kin's feelings surge with anger and worry, no doubt corncered for him and cursing the pirate. He returned his family's feelings. He growled, thinking back to how the man had his brothers. I'm okay. He tried to reassure his brothers, however their feelings surged again. Looking down, eyes widened, finally understanding why they were so stressed. Luffy slightly disappointed, not noticing the blood covering his shoulder. When had he started bleeding? He doesn't feel any pain. He sniffed, causing him to hiss from annoyance. It was the stranger's blood. Luffy immediately lapped the blood off the bond marks, determined to rid the foreign substance blemishing them. The reminder of why it was there in the first place made him annoyed, not just with the perpetrator but with himself for allowing someone else to touch his brothers. With the last few licks, he inspected the skin. Luffy was almost satisfied finding not speck left, but the smell hadn't. It's then he realized that the blood dripped onto the fabric beneath him, soaking in and ruining his nest. He couldn't have that. Biting the material, he dragged it out from his nest. Whitebeards. When Marco entered the meeting room, he was satisfied to find all had received the order being gathered there. They parted, letting the 1st commander through, leading him in front of Pops. From the way Pops was looking down at him, it's easy to assume that he had been updated, probably by Izo or Namor. How is he? His captain asked, the words that was on all their minds. Unfortunately, Marco had nothing positive to give them. His father understood his silence, responding with a tired grunt. Jazu is on standby outside the infirmary at the moment. We're still waiting on any updates. Pops hummed at the information, eyes not leaving his downcast form. Whitebeard stared at his son momentarily before leaning forward, looming above him. His giant hand patted Marco from behind, slightly jolting the smaller pirate out of step. Thatch is one of the most energetic and strong pirates you'll ever see, son. He'll be fine. He grinned reassuringly. Pops, his arm, Haruto reminded. All the commanders looked up to their captain with grim expressions. I understand all your worries, my sons. However, not matter the results. Being now or in the future, we, our family, will be here to support them. No matter the case. The crew nodded determinedly. After all, Pops was right. Some of them had suffered injuries, minor to serious, over their years of piracy. If they lost a limb, they'll build a better one. If someone lost their sight, they'll train them to no longer need them. No matter what, they'd help their family though it. Some were already starting to share ideas to help. Hopefully he'll recover quickly. Marco spoke. "Ah, you really do care." Suddenly they acknowledged the subject of their worries standing right next to them, appearing out of nowhere. "That's too quick," a few yelled, shocked by Thatch's sudden presence. After all, he should be in the infirmary. Immediately everyone noted the lack of Thatch's chef's jacket. Instead, in its place, he wore a tank top, thus displaying the new accessory wrapping his arm. The crew could feel the tension rise, staring at the limp limb. Even a few closer members could see pieces of blood that had seeped through the white cloth, creating a spotted arch. Right now, one thing was on everyone's mind, but no one spoke, worrying for the worse. But the unwanted haunted stares gave them away. "Relax, guys, my arm's fine. Look." Thatch waving his arm. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in the infirmary?" Haruta asked. Not satisfied when seeing Thatch so pale, obviously from the blood loss. He was supposed to stay for the rest of the day, but then Thatch. Jazu crossed his arms, eyes pointing to Thatch. He didn't have to finish for them to understand. After all, it's common knowledge on their ship to know that Thatch hated being in the infirmary, especially being bored. It's the main reason why he loves pulling pranks. So when Thatch is told to stay in the infirmary on bed rest, well, it doesn't go down well. It was pathetic. He was clinging to the Doc's leg with one arm, begging. Doc wasn't happy that he was likely irritating the wound, so they let him out as long as he doesn't do any strenuous work. That stubborn old goat wasn't being fair. He was naming thousands of things that I can't do. It would have been shorter if he just made a list of what I can do. Seriously, treating me like a child. Thatch complained. At that, all the commanders gave Thatch a look. You are a child, they thought. So, no serious damage. Namor stepped in. Yeah, sorry for worrying you guys. Thatch rubbed the back off his neck with an apologetic smile. But don't worry, it's fine. Further demonstrating the bandaged arm. If it's fine, how come your face appears stained as a bowstring? Vista remarked. The only one truly buying Thatch's poor charade was the man himself. He continued trying to convince his brothers of his well-being, that is, until the limb spasm sending involuntary sparks jolting through his body. Instinctually, Thatch brought the arm closer to him protectively. You don't. Stop pushing yourself. You'll reopen the wounds. I swear if you weren't injured, I'd slap you like you deserve. Aizo berated. Though still concerned for him, a wave of relief washed over all of them. Glad to see that Thatch hadn't lost the use of his arm. As well as it appeared, Thatch was still. Well, Thatch. Seriously, Thatch, I'm surprised you can move it at all. What I'd like to know how the one of the strongest commanders ended up competing for your arm in the first place. The moment Fossa finished his question, it wasn't long for all of them to learn of Thatch's prior activity. Out of all the moronic things you've done, this takes the top. No wonder you ended up in this state. You tempted fate too much this time, nearly costing your arm. All right, could you all stop with the comments? Seriously, I'm okay. Sure, my idea may have backfired this time. Brows raised and accusing glares were aimed at him, knowing that this was more than a backfire. But next time my plan will work. Son, Whitebeard's deep voice called out. The large man leaned out of his seat, reaching out to Thatch. We are just concerned about you. Your brothers worry. You shouldn't push aside their concerns. Thatch huffed, his body sagged. Of course he knew his family cared about him as he did for them. He just felt that they were overreacting. Then he saw the large amount of blood you had lost on deck. You can only imagine what we all thought as Marco rushed you to the infirmary. Thatch's mind froze, hearing Pop's words. Had he really caused that much trouble? Thatch cursed himself inwardly. I'm sorry, Pops. Thatch sincerely bowed his head. Whitebeard smiled, ruffling the top of Thatch's head, causing Thatch seconds later to grumble about his ruined pompadour. However, Whitebeard could see the small smile returning to his son's face, which he gave a low chuckle. The air became cheerier, a wave of chuckles and cheeky comments passing over. Oh, Namor thaw. Thatch moved closer, but paused in his words as his brother subtly gave him this strange look. Shrugging it off, Thatch stepped forward, but Namor retreated back, which puzzled Thatch by his brother's behavior. It seemed that he wasn't the only one that had noticed. Is something wrong? Marco asked, watching Namor eyeing Thatch up and down. The fishman didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slightly leant forth, taking a sniff. Quickly, Namor repelled as if he had been burnt, confusing those watching further. Stinks, Namor finally answered. Namor, your words wound me. Thatch placed a hand to his chest, but Namor just rolled his eyes at his brother's dramatic gesture. How could you say such a thing to one of the most well-groomed and stylish pirates out there? I'll have you, my stuff isn't. Not you. That, Namor interrupted, pointing to the bandaged arm. which caught the group's curiosity. Sure, they knew fishmen have enhanced senses even while on the surface. Even Namor, being a predator species, was sensitive to smells, especially blood. But it wasn't exactly the first time the fishman had smelt blood, so shouldn't really be bothering him now. It's possible that you smell the animal from the bite, Marco suggested, while Namor closed in on the fourth commander. He quickly leaned forth, trying to smell the man down. Whoa, bro, that's my personal space. Thatch pushed with one arm, but Namor, strangely, doesn't retreat. On the one hand, Namor does glance up to the taller man. Sorry, Thatch, just got caught up in it. His focus shifted between the arm and Thatch once more before holding out his scaly hand. Do you mind? Doesn't bother me, he answered, letting his brother gently clasp his aching limb, and allowing Namor to maneuver it as he wished. Meanwhile, all the commanders held their silence, immersed with the two before them. First, Namor sniffed the bandage, then quickly moved to the hand, mindful when turning it palm up, pausing when Thatch winced uncomfortably. He took longer inspecting the palm. It was evident that Namor discovered something when he stared at the skin suspiciously. Then he unwrapped the cloth. Holy shit, I thought that you fought against a pest, not a beast, someone exclaimed. Eyes couldn't tear away from the horrid sight. Thatch's arm looked like it had been caught in a blender. Gruesome was an understatement, to say the least. Multiple gashes sliced across the skin, accompanied by an arch of puncture wounds, no doubt where the animal had bitten him hard. It's extremely concerning due to how deep the bite appeared to be, along with the crowd full of stitches. Though no one said anything in that moment, it was obvious that Thatch's arm would never forget the incident. So close to losing its own existence. How the hell is it still moving? Some thought. Mixture of feelings spread, anger, sorrow, and regret as they thought of the possible outcome. Knowing how important their brother's arms were for cooking and his dual sword fighting. Namor's clawed finger goes over each wound, inspecting them either with a hum or a scowl. It's not long till Namor seemed satisfied. The moment he released Thatch's wrist, the piece shattered. Questions, accusations flew around, as well as expectant eyes falling onto him. It's now that the fishman realized that this must be how doctors felt when being interrogated by the patient's family. Oh, he needed to treat the doc if the man had to deal with this each time one of them was injured. Any idea what it is, Namor? Marco spoke above them. Not particularly. The jagged puncture wounds indicate a carnivore, most likely with teeth sharper than mine. If that's the case, it's a predator that could possibly feed on humans. The theory had raised a lot of concerns. If what their brother was suggesting, then their family's safety was at risk. Hang on a minute, then how come it hasn't attacked us yet? Don't know. There are multiple reasons why other animals don't attack us. For example, they're not big enough. Sometimes it's because we stink to them, but mainly animals just wait until they have a chance. Namor explained. That doesn't make sense. Even with any of those reasons, that creature had the chance to have a piece of Thatch. So why didn't it? Haruta brought up an important point, leaving more questions. Maybe Thatch wasn't tasty, or he stinks. Hey, I'm right here, you know. Thatch complained. It's then that Whitebeard interrupted, drawing his son's attention with a bit of coughing. Son, you mentioned something about the smell before. Explain what you found strange. Well, apart from the Thatch's injury, there wasn't anything I could properly detect due to the disinfectant. Namor then pointed to Thatch's hand. On the other hand, there are overpowering scents from his hand. Well, he did grab the animal, Izo stated. This is concerning. Whitebeard spoke. Pops, you don't mean. Marco spoke, worryingly looking to his captain, only to receive a curt nod. Marco grumbled. This was going to cause more problems. He turned back to the rest of the group. Listen up. From now on, everyone needs to be on their guard, especially at night from now on until we're sure. Sure of what? Haruta inquired. Whereas it looked like some of the other members had now caught on. Think about it. Overpowering sense. It's very possible that there is more than one. Not only that, they're territorial. Until we get a handle on this, we have to consider that this pack may harm us. Marco explained, already thinking of the cautionary measures he'll need to write out. Great, so there's more than one. So what's the plan? Are we going to start laying traps down for it? Hopefully it's something better than Thatch's handiwork. This causing said man to glare at Izo. The commanders gradually started suggesting various ideas, from harmless traps to violent ones such as bear traps. All the while through the discussion, their father had stayed silent. Not long, Whitebeard felt a slight tug at his leg. Peering down, he found Thatch standing by his large feet. Hey Pops, can I have a word? Thatch smiled up to him. What are you thinking about, Marco? Namor stood beside Marco. Just about the recent reports. His brother gave him a silent look. Explain. A lot has been going missing since Fishman Island. Not just food, but pillows, blankets, and clothes. It's likely that our stowaways have built a nest. Guess I'll have a division search the ship for it. Shouldn't be an issue. I don't think that's a good idea. Namor continued, before Marco could ask for his reasoning. Truthfully, that'll do more damage than good. If you did, they would certainly lash back, feeling threatened. The image of more of their family flashed in their minds. That's a result both would rather avoid. Marco turned to Namor. Being a fishman, Namor had better knowledge about animals. Said knowledge had saved them quite a few times in the past. What do you suggest we de-slam? Silence fell over the group and the commander's attention is completely on their father, whom had slammed his fist on his chair. Pops, a few whispered. From now on, everyone will have to be cautious for the time being. Also, anything you believe concerning the stowaway is to report immediately to Thatch. Confused and curious, they waited for an explanation but none came. So they just nodded, trusting their father. Whitebeard grunted in satisfaction, then turned back to his son. Thatch, I'll let you handle this for now. However, I expect you have learned your lesson and won't underestimate your opponent again. Pops. Thatch grinned up to him, understanding his father's concerns. Honestly, it made them feel glad knowing how much their old man cared for them, even though he knew and trusted them to look after themselves. Slowly the meeting dispersed. Meanwhile, as Thatch happily strolled away, a certain brother couldn't stop his eyes trailing after the man. Sighing, Marco trusted his family, even Pops, but sometimes he just couldn't leave things as it was. Marco noted to hunt down Thatch later. Thatch had waited all day pondering, planning to do about the little stowaway. Finally, he's able to put his new plan into action. Thatch moved along the kitchen excitedly and confidently, picking various items, ingredients, and would chop away, then sweeping each new piece into the waiting pot. I thought the doctor told you that you should be resting that arm for a week before cooking again. Turning around, he's faced with an unhappy Marco standing at the door, a hand at the hip. He didn't miss the slight tapping of a foot, signaling his displeasure. Thatch pouted, disappointed to be caught in the act. Knife still in hand, he raised his hands, performing a shrug. I'll die of boredom if I don't do something. I'm just passing the time. Besides, it's not that bad. He continued to chop the vegetables. Stop being stubborn. You can say that all you want, but I know otherwise. Knowing Thatch for years, Marco was able to see through the man's mask. He'd seen that bite and knew that even a giant would find it discomforting. Or shall I tell Doc? Marco threatened. You wouldn't. Thatch gasped, watching the man stroll closer and seat himself at the breakfast counter before leaning back, and the look Marco had called his dare. Oh, okay. How about a compromise? I'll stop cooking for the crew until I'm completely healed. However, I'm allowed to cook meals for at least one member. That way I don't get too bored and stay out of your hair. Though Marco seemed to ponder the deal, Thatch could see the balance wasn't in his favor, knowing how stubborn Marco was, especially when dealing out the doc's orders. It's times like this that he could sympathize with Pops. I'll even halt all pranking activity for 4 days. Thatch throws in, displaying the number with his fingers. 1, Marco huffed. Thatch nodded desperately with a small smile. I guess I can allow you to cook for yourself. Nah, it's not for me. Thatch resumed chopping up the Sea King meat. Oh, then who's the unfortunate one then? That's rude. You can't deny my food is wonderful, you'll miss it. Anyway, I'm cooking for Toothy, he revealed. It took a moment for Marco to register what his brother said. His face changed from bewildered realization to disbelief, then he just face-palmed. Why? Almost not wanting to know what Thatch was up to now. Well, what else was I going to call it? Jaws, beast, Thatch mocked. Whereas Toothy is cute, as well as he's had first-hand experience against those teeth, he deemed to leave that point out. Either way, deemed his name choice perfect. You don't know what it looks like or what it is, yet you assume it's cute, Marco stated, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He hardly ever could understand Thatch. This was one of those times and beyond. Thatch, I really think that bite's infected and gone to your head. What I meant was, why did you name it? Marco repeated the question. You're even making food for it. Someone would think that you're keeping a pet. If it was anyone but Marco or Pops, then the twitch in Thatch's smile would have gone unnoticed. As the silence increased between them, so did the weird sweat forming on Thatch's face. If those weren't suspicious enough, then Thatch's avoiding eyes sure were. Marco aimed a stern glare at the other, as if saying confess. Thatch tried to change the subject multiple times, only to fall silent after seeing Marco's annoyance sprout with each sentence. Thatch, Marco's brows furrowed. Okay. Thatch slumped, finally breaking under the pressure, knowing the man wouldn't let it drop. Man, Mark, you really know how to kill a surprise. Can't a guy have a little fun? He grumbled. When that guy is you. No. Marco crossed his arms, leaning back into his seat. Really, what made you think this was a good idea? You were lucky that you still got away in one piece. Now you want to give it another chance at the rest of you. That won't happen. I assure you nothing bad will happen. Toothy just needs a little taming. You've completely lost it. And Pops allowed this. Thatch nodded, continuing to cook. Remember Stefan? Thatch asked. How could he ever forget Stefan? Only the older members remember about him, being there at the beginning of the Whitebeard Pirates, not only as a member but he was Pop's pet. Of course, being part of their crew meant he was no ordinary dog. Stefan was the most viscous dog they'd ever met. If it wasn't his loyalty to Pops, they wouldn't have known how to handle the animal. It took months for Marco to approach Stefan without his guard up. Marco smirked, remembering everyone's shock, him included, when Stefan finally allowed him to pet him, then them crying out in jealousy. Well, I inquired how Pops got Stefan to be so loyal. So you plan on recreating that situation? God no. I failed in the tug of war, so wrestling it into submission is definitely out. Nah, even Pops recommended not to copy his actions, remembering their captain's words. Son, sometimes the slowest approach is better than the shortcut. All you need between man and an animal is trust. For trust to grow, you must build a foundation. How you do it depends on you. I plan to build my foundation with my cooking. Not even the Lady of the Sea herself can turn away my masterpiece, he exclaims proudly, while stirring the pot over the stove. Marco decided that he was missing a certain piece here, due to not understanding the loon's words. He really wished the man would make sense, as well as stop with the crazy, reckless ideas. He could feel this resulting badly. Thatch, come on Marco. By doing this we'll have a new member, or lose one. Don't you trust me to handle this? Thatch placed a hand to his chest, giving a hurtful expression. Marco groaned. He should have known Thatch would have played that dirty card. Damn you, he cursed the redhead. He'll need to get back at him for that. Fine, I'll leave it for now. Instantly Thatch's crocodile tears are gone, annoying Marco, knowing that he was forced to give in to such a cheap trick. However, I want to be kept in the loop. No problem. Thatch mockingly saluted as Marco stood up. Would you like a report with that? He teased, knowing the mountain's paperwork Marco already had to deal with. The don't you dare look targeted at him was answer enough. Oh, Mark, catching the man at the door. Could you keep this between us? Thatch placed a finger before his lips, a gesture to keep quiet. He even dragged out a please, begging his brother. I promise, just make sure to keep to yours. And Thatch, be careful. Marco left, leaving Thatch alone to his own devices. He really is a mother hen, Thatch inwardly chuckled, continuing with his cooking. Unbeknown to him, his plan may be working too well, as a certain someone was already making their way through the vents desperate. Luffy's mouth watered at the smell, even his tummy cried, motivating him to crawl further. Each step was quickly closing the gap while weaving in every direction through the ventilation. Finally turning over a corner, there's a light seeping into the thick darkness. Luffy scurried towards the opening excitedly. Suddenly he froze. Danger, his instincts warned. Then he heard faint sound of voices. Someone's in the kitchen. He became frustrated. Even more so when he smelt a scent of familiar tobacco which he recognized as beaver heads. After last time, this was likely to be a trap too. Remembering how he got away by the skin of his teeth, he stared at the opening desperately, unable to move further to it. Maybe he could snatch up just a small piece. No, Luffy shook his head. Thinking about his brother's recent lecture, he couldn't get caught again. He couldn't upset his kin. Instead, he wanted to show them that he could be dependable. But what could he do? What would they do? He pondered. Sabo would silently stalk his prey, whereas Ace would enjoy a chase before striking down the animal. Flashback. Ni, Sabo, Ace. Luffy had excitedly running into the clearing and crashing onto Sabo's back, crushing the air out of the blonde brother. What's wrong, Luffy? Ace smirked, amused that it wasn't him taking the brunt of Luffy's actions today. Luffy shook his head, smiling. Nothing's wrong. Feeling something shift beneath him, he looked down. Sabo, you look tired. That's not good. Do you need meat? I was resting, Lu, until you jumped on me. Sabo huffed, sitting up and settling the boy in his lap. Sorry, Luffy giggled. So was there something you wanted? Sabo asked. Oh yeah. Remembering his objective, climbing out of Sabo's lap and stood in the center, pushing out his chest out, hands on his sides. Finally, Luffy announced proudly, I created a new move. Oh, they both spoke. Then they noticed the few new scratch marks covering their hatchling's face and arms. Lu, have you tested it? Sabo asked. Fortunately for them, Luffy was a terrible liar. So when Luffy eyes straight off to the side and sucked in his lips, it's obvious for the two brothers what the answer was. Lu, Sabo crossed his arms. You remember what we said, right? He received a nod. And yet you practiced a new move without one of us nearby. What if you had fallen into the water again? I didn't, Luffy pouted. Ace and Sabo just sighed, familiar with this argument and knowing they won't be getting anywhere. So are you going to show us then? Ace trying to change the subject. Luffy brightened back up. Okay, Gamu Gamu no. Pufferfish. Suddenly Luffy's head inflated to the size of a grown human. Meanwhile his brothers watched on with confusion, then worry, seeing Luffy's face begin to change color. From red to purple, getting darker and darker. Luffy, breath. They panicked, though slightly relieved that their hatchling had listened, finally releasing his breath, like a deflating a balloon as it whooshed out of his tiny body, until leaving him panting and laying on the floor. What were you doing? Ace yelled as he and Sabo close in. Sabo picked him up, giving a quick in the eyes and ears, satisfied there was no damage. Lu, you could have damaged your hearing. Even knocked yourself out, Sabo informed. No way, Luffy gasped. Really, what were you trying to do? Ace calming down from another Luffy panic. I was trying to be intimidating. The word is intimidating, Sabo corrected when he saw Ace's brows furrow from further confusion. Yeah, that. Luffy nodded. Sabo told me how animals blow up their faces to scare away others. The explanation had caused Ace to glare at mentioned brother, who raised his hands up and leaning away at the possibility of being hit. It was from a book. How was I supposed to know he would get an idea from that? Sabo defended himself, while Ace's eyes stating, really? This is Luffy. Then Sabo received a punch to the arm. Rubbing the limb, he mumbled about getting the other back, turning back to Luffy. Listen, Lu, from now on you're not allowed to that move. Luffy opened his mouth, but Sabo continued. I know what the book said, but we haven't evolved to develop such skills. Obviously Luffy didn't understand the explanation. Sabo sighed. Just promise you won't do it again. It can because you harm. Okay. Luffy gave nod, not fully getting it, but he understood at least that it was bad, so he'll listen to his kin. But I want to be intimidating. He whined. There are other ways you can be. All you have to do is be scary, right? Yeah, Luffy exclaimed, fists pumped. As if, Ace uttered. Look at him, he's too cute. He couldn't frighten a bird. I could too, he argued. This began a cycle between Luffy and Ace, of R0 and R2. At one point it had swapped around. You'll see, I'll be bigger than Ace, then you'll be scared and I'll be the bigger brother. I'll still be the big brother. You don't become a big brother by size. The news seeped into Luffy slowly. He blinked, once, twice, then he yelled, messing his hair in frustration. Okay, that's enough. Ace, go and get us some food. Huh, why do I? Ace shut his trap, Sabo giving him a wicked smile that promised pure evil if he didn't go now. Well, I guess I could stretch my legs with a chase. Ace trailed away into the jungle. It's all right, Lu. Sabo threading his fingers through his raven hair, comforting Luffy as he leaned into the touch. Honestly, Sabo couldn't deny what Ace had said. Luffy's without a doubt was the most adorable little brother ever, putting the cutest, fluffiest animal to shame. Right now, he'll keep that to himself. Then again, knowing Luffy, he'll end up doing another daft idea. Sabo pondered about the problem. Before long he was smirking evilly, glancing to the trees where Ace had disappeared between. Hey, Lu, you really want to be intimidating? He received a nod. Then how about we teach Ace how scary you can be? Sabo grinned mischievously upon Luffy, receiving a curious look back. How? I'll teach you. First you need prey. Bear, Luffy sated, clambering out of Sabo's lap as his brother got up. Good, but I have something else in mind. Sabo's smile increased, picking up Luffy and placing him on his hip. As they stroll into the jungle, Sabo continuing to talk. What you'll need to do is hide and stay low, then. Do exactly as I say. He whispers into the boy's ear, which Luffy had to cover his mouth so not to giggle. In flashback, mimicking the memory. First make your presence known, Sabo's words whispering in his mind. He started thumping his tail against the metal surfaces around him. Give the meanest snarl. He draws out the deepest sound he could muster. No response. He repeated the actions again, increasing the volume. Still nothing. This time Luffy smacked down his tail so hard, creating a thunderous metallic bang. The effect was instantaneous. There's a yelp, crash, and a thud. Shit, the voice grumbled. The stranger had fallen right in front the opening, revealing that it was indeed Beaverhead. Luckily Luffy had was hidden amongst the darkness. However, as the pirate clambered up, he backed up further in, deciding he was too close for comfort. Whoa, come on. Don't run away. Beaverhead spoke, having heard him scuffling away. What happened to that daring guy taking food right from my hand? He teased, grinning at the hole. A growl echoes out the tunnel at the mention of the incident. That's good to hear, he responded, which would make any standbys wonder what he had interpreted the beastly sound. There was a tense, pregnant pause before Beaverhead spoke again. Sorry about spooking you, which was met with the same prior answer as if to say I wasn't scared, resulting the man to smirk. Luffy watched as the human conversed to him. Well, to the vent. He should turn back to the nest, especially this human had hurt his brothers. He couldn't let him have the chance again. On the other hand, he was intrigued by the bizarre behavior. Not to mention it had been so long since someone had spoken to him, which weren't orders or insults. Sitting awkwardly, the pirate appeared to be pondering over something, his fingers repeating, gracing over the injured forearm. They start to fiddle with the bandage. Everyone believes that you're just some dangerous feral animal. Who wouldn't? Got to admit you put up one hell of a fight for a little guy. Luffy snorted at the compliment. Of course he was strong since his brothers had made sure he was at least able to fend for himself. But I can't blame you. Anyone would retaliate when grabbed. I probably would have knocked the guy out. You just felt threatened and defended yourself. Namor was right when karma biting back. I guess this was one of those times I should have listened. He gave a half smile. Luffy was confused by the pirate's sheepish behavior, finding it to be out of character for the man. Ever since he'd boarded, he categorized Beaverhead as the jester of the ship due to the man's loud, bold, and dramatic personality. Not at all like the blushing man in front of him, grumbling something about being glad no one else was there and being a man. I'm sorry. It was so unexpected as the human swiftly bowed his head low, with a sincere expression. I apologize for hurting you. Also, I'm for trying to starve you and bait you out. It wasn't fair for anyone. You were desperate and I took advantage of that. Luffy stared at the other like he had suddenly grown two heads. The human had apologized. The human had apologized to him. It had been far too long since he had heard such words. Through his entire life only his family had said such words. Even during his imprisonment not once was he displayed with such kindness. To others the action would seem so little, whereas for Luffy it meant so much more. So overwhelmed by the words that tears began to well up in his eyes. As a piece of darkness faded, no long there's a yip followed by a long pair of whines. Confusion covered the man's features due to the mixture of sounds. Minutes drifted till a switch clicked. He's apologizing back, before giving a reassuring grin. Don't worry about it, this is just a flesh wound. You're strong, I won't deny that, but it'll take a lot more than that to stop me. I appreciate your concern. Crossing his arms over his puffed-out chest, with proud and determined eyes. So how about we start all over? My name's Thatch, I'm the cook of the ship. Luffy marveled, listening as his company chattered about himself. He silently giggled about the various trouble the human always seemed to find himself in, either from accidents like the time 3 trees fell on him at the same time, or by his own faults such as pranking his brothers. He couldn't help gaze fondly at the mention of family. Luffy had special sympathy as love practically radiated off him. The one-sided conversation stretched on, but for them it flew with each new story. At one point he's sure he heard something about a mango which looked like pineapple that can change into a turkey. Just the thought made Luffy's head loll in a puddle of drool. How he wished to find that mango. Maybe it'll taste like a kebab. Growl. Oh sorry, here I am getting carried away. When you're hungry. Thatch quickly trekking back to the stove. It wasn't before he returned, accompanied with a wide platter of Sea King stew. Luffy stared at the succulent meal longingly. He shook with excitement, holding himself back as to not leap out there and then, watching Thatch placing the pallet down and slowly sliding it across. Closer and closer, it was now an inch away from the shadows when it stopped. His jaw dropped. Why he stopped, expectant questioning eyes looking between the man and food. If in human form he would have been banging his fists on the floor, possibly reaching out a rubbery hand. Now, how about we make a truce? Thatch spoke, knowing he had the animal's full attention. From now on I'll feed that bottomless pit of yours. Thatches pushed the plate slightly and pausing again. On one condition. You stop taking from the storerooms. Luffy instantly growled, frustrated with Thatch's baiting. Then I guess I'll have to find someone else that'll want this juicy delicious food. Fingers dragging the plate away, causing Luffy to growl louder about his displeasure. Come on, Thatch huffed. It's not a bad deal. I don't want any more food disappearing from my storeroom, and that'll only happen if you are fed. Thatch tried to reason, but there's no response. How about this? I give you this plate. If you like it, you leave the food supply alone. If don't like it, well, you can continue raiding and I'll stop with the traps. Though Thatch really hoped it didn't come to the later. There will certainly be jokes about him haggling with an animal that he could handle, but if he lost, not only will his brothers maim him, but he'd rather avoid them hunting the animal. It didn't take a minute when Luffy snorted, allowing the other to bring back the food to him. Finally it enters the shadows, but he was still hesitant. It's not poisoned. That would be a sacrilege as a cook. Thatch reassured, but that wasn't Luffy's concern since he could smell it. There was. Oh, right. Thatch snapped his fingers. Gradually the growling faded as the man clambered up, retreating away. Luffy glanced between the dish to the direction the other had disappeared. Though out of sight, the smell of fresh tobacco was still close. No doubt the human was still hiding nearby. He was close, still too close for his comfort. Luffy snarled louder, warning the other to back away. No way was he letting anyone see him. It was too risky, even if he had forgiven the other. The warning clearly understood. The human's presence dwindled to the furthest part of the room. Luffy doesn't wait any longer. Not even a second passed till he was chowing down, face buried as much as he could. Whines flowed out of his being as each bite filled his mouth with an explosion of flavor. The next bite better than the last. Delicious. That was the only word to describe it. It had been so long since he had such a great meal. Even Daden's cooking never came close to this. It was official, this was the best meal Luffy had ever tasted. Even his tummy agreed, giving out a pleasant rumble as it was finally filled. Faintly a chuckle joined the sounds of chomping, chewing, and happy whines. Good, isn't it? Thatch stated, but it fell on deaf ears. So engrossed in the palate, gorge himself like a glutton. Before long the whole meal was devoured, leaving the dragoon to lap at the last scrapings clinging to the dish. Afterwards, establishing there was nothing left, Luffy became crestfallen, wishing for more. Staring at the plate, as if just by doing so more food will appear. He nudged the plate with his head back towards the edge of the vent. Peering out, Luffy made sure the wasn't close enough to see him, before giving a final shove, sliding the dish out and across the floor. Hidden once again, Luffy yipped, summoning the cook. Luffy waited, listening to the footsteps approached. Brown shoes stride into his view. Then Luffy put the next part of his plan into action. Once a hand started to retrieve the item, the dragon emanated a loud growl and scratched his talons inside the vent. The hand paused, then continued, causing another growl. Suddenly a heartful laugh erupted from Thatch, filling the room. The action had confused Luffy, not understanding what the other was laughing at. Luffy knew there wasn't anyone else in the room and Luffy hadn't done anything funny. Not that the man would be able to see if he did. He finally debated if the human was actually crazy. I take it this is your way of wanting seconds, the happy voice explained. Instantly Luffy yipped eagerly, which Thatch replied with a new full palate. Later he'll realize how much he underestimated Luffy's hunger. But that was the prize of their new friendship. Ace, he had screwed up. Correction, he had fucking screwed up, big time. Many times his temper has caused trouble, even if he tries to keep it in check. But once again he had let his temper get the best of him, opening his mouth. Why did he open his damn mouth? A night passed since Sabo had left him on the beach, which Ace hadn't left. He'd considered going back to the ship, but he'd rather sleep on glass than go back to that human stench-filled ship alone. Instead, he spent the night sulking, pacing, even roaring at the ocean at one point, anything to relieve the stress. But just made him more frustrated, restarting the cycle again and again till he became exhausted. Sitting down, fiddling with Luffy's straw hat. Luffy would be so disappointed seeing me now, thinking how his youngest brother would get really upset when they fought, even try to make things right. At one time they had such a big argument that they hadn't spoken to each other for days. So Luffy had decided to trap the two in a cave. He couldn't help the longing smile, remembering that was actually a den of a giant bear that the two had to fight to get out. In the end, they made up and both scolded the hatchling before eating the bear. If only you were here, Lou. Then you'd come up with one of your lunatic ideas. Feeling the tiny flutter of comfort next to Sabo numb Mark. As expected, Sabo had blocked his bond. That was so him, probably trying to hide their argument from the hatchling. He thumbed Lou's mark, finding how ironic it was that his little brother was worried about them when only moments ago it had been the other way round. Just the thought that someone would harm his little brother has him over the edge on multiple occasions. Sure, Sabo would be there to reassure him. However, this time was the first he had taken it out on Sabo. He groaned. What am I supposed to do, Lou? Luffy at breakfast. Then Mark woke up surrounded by fruit with a pink bow on his head. It was brilliant. That's why I call it the fruit basket prank. Thatch laughed loudly. Of course he got me back. Afterward he dropped me right from the sky. Luckily for me he caught me just as his seeking surfaced, or I would have been lunch. Not that Marco would have let happen, but that week I made sure not to turn my back on him. Luffy silently snickered at the man's story. He had taken a liking to the strange-looking human called Thatch. He gave him delicious food so far, along with stories of his many pranks. It was especially funny when this guy Mango was involved. Luffy guessed the two were close considering how the other seemed to put up with Thatch's pranks. It sort of reminded him of how he was with his brothers. Of course, Luffy being the one to cause trouble. A pot on the stove began to clatter, with hot steam squeezing out from beneath the lid. Food's ready. Thatch got up, moving back to the kitchen. Luffy watching patiently by small eager eyes. But something bothered Luffy as he observed Thatch flinching at random points. What's he doing? Is he trying to be funny? Luffy watched the human as he shook. It was then Thatch was forced to put a dish down and grip his bandaged arm. How did he get that? Suddenly yesterday flashes back. Luffy realized what was the cause of the man's pain. It was him. Luffy knows he doesn't regret doing what he did at the time and wasn't sorry for it. Even Other had mentioned that he wasn't to blame. However, it didn't stop the small guilt to wedge itself in. He stared thoughtfully at Thatch's face, then to the arm, and back again. Slowly his face turned red, overworking his mind. He wished his brothers would tell him what to do, but they hadn't given him any sign. They'd been very quiet recently. Maybe this was one of those moments they thought he needed to learn by himself. He hated those. He huffed, finally the color returning to his face. Thinking hurts, he whined. Thatch. Unknown to the turmoil taking place, Thatch poured the thick soup, then picked it up, this time with his better arm. Here you go, Toothy. He placed the food down into the vent, before moving away, giving the little chap some space. Though it had only been a day, Thatch was enjoying feeding his new company, especially since Toothy seemed to enjoy his cooking. So far he's only met Toothy, but he then remembered Numer claiming there were more due to the various scents. Maybe it's nestlings. Would explain a lot, especially the amount he eats. Wait, that would mean Toothy was female, right? Or is he a male caring for the expectant mother? Thatch groaned, rubbing his forehead. There were just too many unknowns. For now, he decided to just leave it as it is, figuring he'll find out eventually. Thinking about it, he should have been demanded seconds by now. Glancing to the side of the vent, Thatch was confused seeing empty dish sitting halfway out of the shadow. Guess he's not that hungry. However, as he reached in, the dish vanished back into the shadows. Thatch was momentarily surprised before realizing what had just happened. Okay, very funny. Good prank. Now give me the dish back. He tapped his forefinger on the edge of the vent. Again the dish just poked back out from the darkness innocently. Satisfied, Thatch finally gripped the plate, but all of a sudden the bowl is yanked back into the vent along with Thatch's arm. the unexpected pull resulting in Thatch face palming the wall just over the vent. What the F was Thaw, his yell dying on his tongue as he felt something was touching his hand. That something being wet and lapped slowly up his palm to his wrist. Oh Davy, maybe Marco was right. He's had a taste of me and wants the rest of me. He was about to pull his arm right back out from the danger. However, he heard something akin to purring. The licks turned to nudges, feeling a strange texture briefly caress his hand, tensing when it moved up the arm, more precise to his clothed wound. Despite Thatch's concern, the gentle touches continued, until a long whine is released with toothy prodding at the bandage, whining once more followed by more licking. It sort of reminded him when Stefan would get upset when Pops got hurt. Oh, Thatch began to chuckle as relief overcame him, connecting the dots. So that's what this nonsense is about. You know, you have an interesting way of apologizing. Sitting back up, rubbing the strained shoulder. You sure are a weird little guy. You don't usually knock a guy down when saying sorry. Not that I'm complaining. A little unconventional, but hey, I've had worse. Not to mention it's the first time I've made friends with, well, whatever you are. Thatch grinned. Maybe one day I'll. Boom. Suddenly the room rocked hard, followed by more explosions. Thatch fell onto his side with a yelp as the floor swayed again. The booming became louder, along with more yelling outside, increasing the headache Thatch just received from the floor. He tried to clamber up, but there's striking pain before he collapsed again. Groaning, it wasn't hard to assume that falling onto his arm had probably torn a few stitches. Glancing down confirmed that, as red slowly appeared through the bandages. There's a concerned whine. Yeah, I'm good. Using the other arm, he managed to get up while keeping the other tucked closely to his chest. When he makes it to a window, what he saw didn't surprise him. An unfamiliar pirate ship shooting at them, with more pirates jump from it to join the fight on the Moby's deck. For a normal person it was a terrifying thing, but for them, being a pirate and a strong one at that, it was just a regular thing. It was just another sight of some newbie crew trying to take Pop's head. Barely something he had to worry about. After all, they weren't the strongest crew for nothing. Don't worry, little guy, just another pirate fight on the seas. As long you're in here, you've got nothing to worry about, he reassured his companion, which a yip replied excitedly. Oh, you like pirate fights? Well, maybe I'll tell you some of my own tale. Boom, crack. A cannonball came crashing through the galley. It wasn't long before a second one shot through. This time everything went flying. The galleys instantly transformed. Food, pans, and cutlery had been tossed to every area, and anything that was wood was now debris. Unfortunately, amongst said wreckage, Thatch laid motionless, a distant whine calling out, only increasing when met with silence. That is, until finally fitful groans and coughs erupt from Thatch, which disturbed the dusk, causing him to cough more. Moaning, Thatch gripped his head, hoping to stop the constant ringing. Slowly opening his eyes, he discovered just how lucky he was. Nearly everything was lying over him, some planks with not-so-friendly nails pointing down at him. Fortunately, he'd fallen next to the fridge, which was taking most of the weight. Safe in here, eh? I've really got to quit jinxing myself. The situation only got worse as he looked himself over. He didn't mind the scratches or the bruising that would sure appear later, but a completely blood-soaked bandage was another thing. The doc's gonna have it in for me. Hopefully, he'll be able to talk, beg his way out of bed rest again. It certainly didn't help when he tried to crawl out that his foot refused to move, wedged tightly under the rubble. It's really not my day. Twisting and squeezing, but his foot refused to budge. Usually, this stuff wasn't a problem, since he usually had his swords. But today he had left them in his room since he wasn't allowed to use them for a while. And he couldn't very well lift the wood off him. That would only damage his arm further. Guess I'm going to be stuck here for a while. Thatch huffed, hoping someone to come soon. At least I should stop the bleeding. Using one hand, he unlatched and removed his belt. Wrapping around at the top of his bleeding arm, he grunted, buckling it tightly. Do my eyes deceive me? Looks like a commander of the Whitebeards had a nasty accident. Looking up at the new voice, Thatch spotted a stranger walking through the galley's broken wall. The man was plain-looking, to say least. Nothing Thatch would have considered a threat before. But right now in his situation, the sword the pirate was dragging over the floor was definitely looking menacing. Or it's just my lucky day. Each step bringing the man closer. Thatch's face became serious and eyes challenging. Think you can handle it? Don't believe that there's a chance you'll be getting off our ship once you raise your sword. Big words for a man that's about to be at death's gate. The pirate standing before Thatch grinned evilly. What, you're so weak that you can only attack if the opponent is already down? Or are you just that cowardly? Thatch sneered back. The FCK, you say? I'll show you weak, he spat. Quickly the furious man raised his sword threateningly, and Thatch prepared himself. Blood was shed and a frightening scream followed by a clang and a thud. In a blink of an eye, the pirate was no longer standing over Thatch, but thrashing in agony on the ground next to him with the sword long forgotten. Make it stop, he repeatedly cried. Watching in awe, Thatch tried to see what was happening, but the enemy's lower half was being dragged into a pile of broken planks. However, the continuous snarls and growls coming from the pile only revealed it as something beastly. It's then Thatch's mind registered what just happened. He had just been saved by Toothy. "I'll kill you, MF." The pirate pulled out a hidden pistol, quickly firing it into the wreckage. The shot snapped Thatch back to reality. Upset that the man had shot at Toothy, Thatch snatched up a scattered pan, then without mercy hit onto the hand, knocking the gun away, then whacked the man upside the head, knocking the man out. "Thatch, you all right?" Jazu came storming through the door, followed by Namor. "Over here," he called to his brothers, which they rushed over, that is until they saw a motionless body with a pan-wielding Thatch next to it. Many questions went through their minds looking at the whitening figure and their pan-wielding brother. "Did you seriously kill a guy with a pan?" Namor looking bewildered. "He's not dead." "Not yet," Thatch said, tossing the pan away. "By the way, I could use a little help if it's not too much trouble. Half the kitchens fell on you. Are you hurt?" Jazu noting Thatch's position, carefully checking the wreckage. "Nah, the fridge is taking most of the weight. Apart from a few torn stitches and my leg being pinned down, I'm dandy." "Okay, Namor, you grapple him. And on my signal, you pull him out." Jazu reached into the mess. Meanwhile, Namor moved to Thatch as instructed. It wasn't long till Thatch was free, but once he had been, he immediately got up. "Thatch, you should rest. You need to see Doc, quick," Namor stating his concern. But Thatch ignored their comments to settle down. With his sore ankle, Thatch limped past the pirate's body, before crouching in front of a pile of wood. "What you doing?" they asked, becoming confused when Thatch started to rummage through the wreckage. Jazu moved forth, hand onto Thatch's shoulder, but the man's too distracted to notice. "Thatch, stop. You can't ag." "Jazu," Namor interrupted Jazu. The larger man looked to him confused. "I smell a lot of blood," was the only words Namor spoke with a grim face. Gradually the wreckage was cleared, but what laid beneath was something out of a horror show. One of the pirates now had the appearance similar to Thatch's arm. Flesh tore apart. On the other hand, this looked more vicious, the tearing being deeper. The creature was even strong enough to snap the bone, leaving it the bottom half of the leg completely bent in an unnatural twisted way. It was clear from the amount of blood loss puddling round it that the pirate wasn't going to make it. Not that they cared, only pitied the dying man like any other that death was caused in such a terrible way. The two were so dazed by the scene that they didn't notice Thatch picking something out. Open his palm revealed a small round bullet. Thatch lets out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, seeing not a single speck of red on it. Thank Davy Jones, he thought, believing the pirate had missed. Toothy was alive, he was safe. Later, that evening. It wasn't long before the whole of Moby Dick had gotten word as to what happened in the galley. Well, at least the part about the dangerous creature had struck again and Thatch had been trapped during the attack. Hearing this had many of his brothers swarming him with worry. And every time Thatch assured them that he was fine and was hardly in danger from Toothy at least. But he left that out, otherwise there'd be more questions. Despite his words, none of the crew believed him, demanding him to see the doctor, some even shoving him to the infirmary. So here he was now, being stitched back together like a rag doll. "Can't stay out of trouble, can you?" Thatch flinched as a needle pierced his skin. "Isn't my fault that Lady Luck is against me," Thatch retorted. "You're in here most of the time because it is your fault. This time was no exception. You're supposed to be resting, so what were you doing in the galley anyway?" The doc sent a suspicious glare. "Nothing," Thatch is too quick to reply. Next thing he knew, the stitches tightened unpleasantly. "Ouch, what was that for?" "Nothing," the doc repeated sarcastically, obviously catching onto the lie, but the other doesn't press further into it, which Thatch was thankful for. "I just need to wrap your arm and I'm done." He grabbed the salve from the side, applying it carefully before the bandages were put on. "You'll need to rest for about 3 days before you walking on that foot. I'll give you some medication to cope with the pain for your arm. You'll need to take one with your meals. Your dinner has already been brought in." He gestured to the tray of food, settled on the bedside. "Someone will be bringing your meals while." Unfortunately, for the doctor, Thatch wasn't listening anymore. Instead, he was waiting for his chance for escape. He was finishing up with the bandage. Waiting, he says something, which Thatch just nods. Waiting, the doc gets up, moving to his desk now. Thatch gritted his teeth, ignoring his aching ankle as he swiftly limped for the exit. He inwardly laughed at his victory, hearing the doctor yelling in anger far behind him, demanding him to return to the bed. Fat chance. Reaching the door, Thatch swung it open to finish his escape. There was one problem. He wasn't expecting Marco to be standing on the other side. Crap. Stopping in his steps, Thatch was faced with an unimpressed Marco. Obliviously, he was in big trouble. Thatch gave out a nervous laugh. "Hey, Mark, I was just going for a stroll." "No, yoy. Oh, give a brother a chance." Eyeing the gap beside Marco, leading to his freedom. It doesn't go unnoticed. Yet Marco doesn't block it, just raising his brows as if daring him. He dared. Thatch bolted for freedom, momentarily confused as Marco let him pass. His confusion is soon replaced by pain, followed by the sensation of falling. Thatch was partially grateful for Marco catching him, otherwise he would have been kissing the deck for nth time that day. Still, he wasn't happy that Marco had caught, unfairly might he add. See, you're in no condition to be strolling. Yoey, see what? You tripped me. What sort of brother does that to an injured person? So you admit that you're injured. Thatch just gave him a raspberry. Marco sighed in frustration at his brother's childish behavior. Since Thatch wasn't going to return willingly, there was only one other choice. In the end, he was carrying his brother like a sack of potatoes over his shoulder, which Thatch weakly fought and protested to, in vain. Seriously, it was like dragging a screaming child to get their shots. Despite Marco being shorter than the other, he was remarkably strong, something one would compare to inhuman, well, someone not from the New World would. So carrying the fourth commander back into the infirmary wasn't a hard task. Good work, Marco, the doc praised, satisfied his escapee being returned. Then instructing which bed to put Thatch on, the doctor put the medication he had been previously searching for next to the tray of food. Thatch didn't miss the warning look the doc sent him, making it clear what would happen if Thatch didn't take them when he was told to. I'll leave him to you, the doctor said to Marco before making his leave, out the open door. I'll just leave later when Noah's looking. Oh, that's not going to be a problem. Marco pulled out a small item from his pocket, dandling it mockingly at Thatch, who became bewildered, recognizing the key as the first commander's skeleton key. It's a second till it clicked to what his brother was implying. That's imprisonment, he gasped. No, it's Thatch keeping, putting the key back when Thatch tries to swipe it. I won't survive the boredom, I'll rot away. I'm sure you will survive, Yoy. I'll have Izo drop some book off so you can pass the time, or maybe you could use this time to catch up on your reports if you're that bored. Thatch's complaint ceased at the mention of doing paperwork instead. Grumbles about unfair brothers and overprotective mother hens. Marco ignores that last comment, satisfied Thatch had quietened at least for now. It's only for a few days. You're lucky it wasn't worse, Yoy. I handled it. Wasn't going to let some no-named rookie take me down. That's not what I meant. It could have been you laying in the galley right now. It's like Namor said it was waiting for its chance and took it. You're exaggerating. Marco shook his head. Thatch, don't say it. You promised you'd let me handle it. You can't go back on your word now. Besides, my plan's working. Marco gave a doubtful look yet inquires about it. Thatch excitedly mentioning how well the feeding went and how he would tell it stories. Marco making a comment only you. Of course, Thatch had conveniently forgotten to mention his close encounter with Toothy earlier. Sure, he had promised to tell Marco everything, but he didn't say when. For now, Thatch decided it was best to keep the moment to himself, especially knowing that the stupid bird brain would more than likely overreact, scolding him for being careless. He wouldn't doubt that Marco would go so far to go to Pops. Nope, he was going to keep quiet for now. Well, he did save me. That was just a coincidence. Marco returned. Why couldn't Thatch see this animal was just too dangerous? It had taken down a fully grown man for Davy's sake. Yet it was clear that Thatch had his mind set on making friends with said beast. Knowing the man, he wasn't going to budge the slightest. Marco released an exasperated sigh. Just be careful, Yoy. Not that he had to really say it, but hoped Thatch wouldn't do anything too risky. Animals were unpredictable. Anything could set them off, especially one that was territorial. One wrong move would surely have his brother losing a limb. If that happened, he'd exterminate the creature himself. After all, they were Whitebeards. If anyone, be it pirate, marine, or even beast, hurt one of them, they will make sure they ever regret crossing their family. For now, though, he'll stay cautious. If in fact what Thatch said is true, the creature had purposefully protected him, then they had nothing to worry about. He highly doubted that was the case. Thatch tried to sort out his position on the bed. It was quite difficult moving to the center of the bed with his injuries. He suppressed the wails as his body winced in distress. Davy, it feels worse than before, he moaned. Here, Marco reached out his hand to the arm, lightly laying over it before blue flames ignited from his hand. Drawing closer, the flames engulfed Thatch's arm. If it was someone else other than a Whitebeard pirate, they would have expected a burning sensation. Instead, the flames were cool as they danced over the injury, the pain fading slightly into a comfortable numbness. How's that, Yoy? Better, thanks. Don't try to move it. I only relieved the pain, so it's what did I just say? Marco chided, spotting his brother about to do the exact opposite to what he just said. Being scolded, Thatch gave an apologetic smile as to say my bad, rubbing his nape unconsciously. You know my flames of rebirths has its limits, Yoy, Marco said, lightly shaking his hand as his flames died down. Even though it will heal faster now, you still staying here? Thatch pouted, but didn't argue. Satisfied, Marco took his leave out the open door. See you later. Marco gave a curt wave as he left, closing the door behind him. At the sound of the lock clinking, he slumped onto the bed with a huff, staring frustratingly at the ceiling. He hated being stuck on bed rest. It was so dull. After all, there was nothing to do besides, well, rest obliviously. So boring. If only there was something interesting to do. Thatch said, There was an agreeable whine. Exactly, Thatch pouted. Wait, whine? Sitting up he glanced around, confirming no one else was with him. Thinking about it, it wasn't a sound a person would make. Toothy, calling out curiously. Realizing his company, his mood brightens, scanning the room for a vent. However, was confused when he didn't see one. Is it hidden behind the desk? He thought, maneuvering to the edge off the bed. Then as soon as his feet graced the floor, a growl erupts from under the bed, pulling them back up out of reflex. When did he get under there? Amazed by ... The only possibility would be when Marco brought him back, or at least during his visit. That's being amazing on a whole different level, as he had sneaked past Marco. Marco, on the other hand, he shouldn't be that shocked after all. Tooth has slipped past the whole crew for who knows how long. Putting his feet back down, was greeted with another growl. Thatch was confused by the aggressive sound. He paused, though, raising the limbs slightly. Silence. Wait a minute. He lowers one foot. Nothing so far. Then his bandaged foot. Oh, did he get one hell of a growl. That little bugger is scolding me, he thought. Oh hell no. I can put up with Marco, but no way will I let you boss me around as well. Ignoring the warning, he began standing. His mistake. He yelped, feeling something nip one foot, falling back onto the bed. Okay. You win, I'll stay put. He surrendered, rubbing his newly assaulted foot. It didn't hurt much, but he wasn't willing to go against his little friend's demands again, especially if next time he'll might get something a little harder than a nib. So he ends up laying across the bed in defeat. It seemed Toothy was happy with his words, because soon there was mules, along with kitten licks to his swollen ankle. Thatch chuckled at the ticklish tongue, but doesn't stop Toothy, thinking this was an animal's way of showing affection. Becoming quite attached to me, aren't you? Thatch teased. Still the pampering continued. Very affectionate. His grin widened. Honestly, he was slightly dumbfounded that his new company was acting so devoted. He had at least expected it to take days for Toothy to warm up to him, considering it had taken a whole month for Pop's dog, Stefan, to let someone pat him other than Pop's. No to mention Stefan would eye anyone that came close to Pop's. Guess I have my own bodyguard. He snickered at the confirming yip. It was nice to know there was someone else watching his back, besides his family. Well, I'm going to be here for a day or two. Thatch sat up, hearing Toothy shuffle back under the bed. Outside. Definitely a shy one. So if you want, maybe you can pop by. It'll be nice to have the company. It quickly received a snort. Sure, it almost sounded eager. Great. He smiled. Oh, one more thing. Leaning over and plucking a plate from the tray, Thatch placed it carefully onto the floor. Can't let my savior go unrewarded. Got to say thank you for back then. Nudging it under the bed. It's not much, but once I'm out of here, I'll treat you to an amazing meal as my appreciation. Soon after settling into the medical bed, Thatch was content for once in the infirmary, listening to the pleased munching sounds. He waited patiently, and soon the noise faded into a comfortable silence. So how about another of my amazing tales? Ace and Sabo. It was the next day. Still, he hadn't come with a proper plan to apologize to Sabo. Honestly, he was never great at thinking things through. Instead, he decided to wing it. He was prepared for what hit or punishment Sabo threw at him. So what the hell am I still standing here for? He thought, the familiar shadow of their ship looming over him. Ace had been standing for who know how long, not taking another step closer. He stared at one particular place. After all, living in a forest, they liked high places. The crow's nest. The dark aura emitted from it only confirmed his sibling's presence. Gathering all his nerve, he climbs the plank. He really regrets that it was midday, as now all the crew were awake and out on deck. At first they stared at him confused, probably because he was back so soon. Usually after one is tantrum, he's gone for a few days. Looking to his vice, Harry, spotting the middle-aged man near the center of the deck with his arms crossed. Ace rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, mumbling, I'm back to Harry. Out of all the humans he had met, he found Harry to be a decent one. Obviously, Sabo had been the one to recruit him after helping us out in the East Blue. Ace wasn't comfortable with humans, but Harry eventually caught on to Ace's boundaries and respected them, as well as made sure the other new members knew, which Ace was slightly grateful for, and as time passed became to respect him. He's been brooding up there since getting back. Do I need to be concerned? Harry wasn't satisfied when receiving a shrug. Another shrug. Does it have to do with you know? This question was quieter, but by the warning glare he got, Harry knew his answer. It was then he gestured all the crew inside. The crew didn't dawdle. No, it was best to leave their captains be. Think you can handle it? Maybe. I think this might take a while, Ace responded before moving toward the rigging. A few moments later, and 19 meters high, he was greeted by his brother's back. Aware of his presence, Sabo kept his place. Climbing into the crow's nest, he positioned himself next to him, leaning against the edge. Still, Sabo refused to acknowledge him. Ace had expected that his kin didn't want to speak to him. Right now, he wouldn't let that deter him. Sab, what I saw. Don't, Sabo said sternly. Despite being shot down, Ace took the confidence he had left to continue. I know you don't want to hear this right now. I can understand if you want your own space for a while or if you want to kick me off this mast. Whatever the punishment, I'll take it. Just listen." Sabo still wasn't looking at Ace, instead focusing on the scene in front. But Ace knew his brother was listening. "I'm sorry for everything. I was totally in the wrong. For taking it out on you. What I said, even for the fight. I should have handled the situation better than I did." "Ace, I know you're sorry," Sabo huffed, finally acknowledging the other. "After all these years we've been together, I'm used to your tantrums. And I knew the moment I walked away you were sorry. And that you will never intentionally hurt me. That's just how you are. However, you said those words. You may take them back now, but you still said them." His hands began to quiver, from anger or heartache he couldn't tell, maybe it was both. Sabo turned around holding back a snarl. "Do you have any idea how that made me feel?" This was one of the reasons he'd been avoiding Ace. He knew he would get emotional. It was luck that they were in the crow's nest so none of the crew would see the yellow flecks of scales appearing over his skin and his blue eyes slitting, not to mention his talons ruining his new gloves. "For a second you thought I had stopped being your brother. For a second you believed I had stopped caring. That I had decided to abandon Luffy, our hatchling." Speechless, Ace couldn't deny what Sabo had said, only making Ace loathe himself further, now realizing how much damage he had truly done. "Not once have I stopped caring, nor hoping to see him again. I would give my life to see his carefree smile one more time." By the end of the sentence, Sabo was a mess. The bitterness flowed out with each word. Sabo collapsed onto the floor, clawed hands combing through his tattered blonde hair. "You say I'm calm, but I'm the complete opposite. Like you, I want to scream and cry for him when I feel his pain. Yet I have no right. Not when I'm the one who put him there." His voice became hoarse as tears welled up in the corner of his eyes. "What? You heard what I said. It's my fault." Sabo sniffled. "I know what you said. I mean, what do you mean you're to blame? What happened to the brother that would go on about it not being our fault?" Hands clamped onto the blonde's shoulders, Ace looking down at his weeping kin. "I lied. What else could I do? You were going down a dark path, yelling that Luffy was taken because you'd blacked out, that you were weak. I thought I could be strong for you, but I was just deluding myself. I was the weak one. My actions split us apart." Suddenly Sabo was grabbed by collar, pulling him back to his feet, till was a hair's width from Ace's face. Pure frustration on his freckled face. "As I remember, you were at the bottom of the bay. I don't see how this is your fault. You did nothing." "Exactly. I did nothing. You may think otherwise, but, remembering that day, I know it's really mine. It was my mistake you both were there. Otherwise Lou wouldn't have been taken and you had been lying half dead." The images of finding Ace haunted his nightmares. "All this would have been avoided if I had just fought from the beginning. If I had done something sooner." "Shut up," Ace exclaimed, his face downcast at some point, eyes unreadable with a shadow cast over them, only showing a tight frown. "Jay, just stop, please." It was obvious Sabo had more to say, but that was not going to happen. Ace couldn't bear to listen anymore. He welcomed the silence. Sabo was good at masking his emotions even through the bond. Mainly to not worry Luffy, Ace understood that. But realizing that Sabo was even hiding his true self around him hurt, in more ways than one. It just showed how unreliable and selfish he'd been this whole year, not once noticing the stress of his kin. "I'm such an idiot. The whole time you've been there for me, whereas I forgot to do the same. I'm so blind that I made you suffer alone." Ace pulled Sabo into a comforting embrace, before speaking again. "But, you keep saying if. If that's the case, then I share the blame. If only we were stronger." "No, Ace," that was Sabo trying to pull away, but Ace kept his grip. "Damn it, that's the point. I wasn't in the wrong just as you weren't. I know there's a lot you or I could have done, but it still happened. It's like you've been saying. The only ones to blame are those who split us apart." Ace continued to console his kin, in a way that you could compare to a cat. Sabo couldn't help blush but relaxed all the same at the sound of purring. He inwardly cursed how easy his dragon half was to manipulate. His kin did like taking advantage of that. On the other hand, he was no different. "I promise you this now, I and Lou will never blame you for it. So you shouldn't either." Just had to pull the Lou excuse. Sabo slightly chuckled. It seemed Ace was using his own tricks against him this time, and couldn't deny that it was working a bit. "Made you listen." Ace pulled from the hug, finally giving them space. "Feeling better, I guess. I need a little time just to sort things out." "All right, I'm here if you need an ear. And if I find out you've been keeping from me again, I swear I'll knock you back into the ground." A moment passed till Sabo grumbled, correcting about who actually pushed who down and won. Ace smirked but left it. "I'll let him have this one. Luffy. It's cold," Luffy thought, limbs shivering and goosebumps forming from the icy air wafting around him. "It's cold," he whimpers, huddling his tiny dragon form tighter and tail wrapping all over himself, hoping for it to shut out the cold so once again Luffy could return to his dream of Meat Island. The action was in vain as the cold seeped through the gaps, slowly attacking his core. It wasn't cold anymore, it was freezing. Luffy paused blindly about desperately searching for his blankets, growing more and more frustrated as each time is met with bareness. Groggy eyes open searching around for the elusive nesting blankets, however, only become confused by his surroundings. Though the space was small like his nest, there were none of the blankets that he had perfectly selected for his cozy den. He tries thinking back. It takes a few rusty gears in his head to remember. He was in the infirm, that weird room that smelled of medicine. Last thing he recalled was listening to Thatch's story. Guess I fell asleep, Luffy yawns. Half awake, he sluggishly steps to the edge of the bed. Unfocused eyes look around for the vent he had once entered from. Said vent barely peeking out behind a desk. It would have been awkward for any animal to squeeze through. Luckily, Luffy was rubber and could squeeze through with a snap. Longing for the comfort of his nest, Luffy shuffles from beneath the bed, but flinches back as a hand drops in front of his face, spooking the little dragon. Stiff as a board, Luffy waits for the limb as it gave out the occasional twitch. Minutes pass. The hand still dangles there. Luffy gives it a quick sniff. Thatchy recognizing his friend, he licks it fondly, though still no movement. Luffy then noses the palm, purring at the heat it gave off against his cold skin. Drawn to the warmth, Luffy follows the arm up, pulling himself onto the bed. The dragon crept along the slumbering figure till he paws open a crevice between the blanket and the adult. Eagerly, Luffy nuzzles his way in, slowly being engulfed by the fabric. The warmth inside was perfect, even more so as he saddled beside the main source of warmth, head drooping onto the abdomen of the other, which helped lull the hatchling to sleep once more with each rise of breath. Marco, hours later in another room, a speck of light slowly crept into the room of the first commander, illuminating a stack of papers on the desk with said commander hunched over his desk asleep. The light continued brighten the room, causing the tired man to stir. Rising, he stretched his arms with a yawn, relieving his stiff muscles. Why am I so sore? His mind steadily catching up to the situation as he wakes, looking at the paperwork before him. He had been filling out the reports and sorting out the budget for the new repairs for the Moby Dick, caused by yesterday's attack. He groaned to himself for falling asleep over his desk. It wasn't like he was young anymore. Stretching once again, feeling his spine popping as he does, which eases his sore back. A yawn escapes him, to which he notices his foggy breath. Guess we're near a winter island. Glancing to the side, his thoughts are confirmed as snowflakes dance past the window. He guessed it was a little colder in his room. Being that his devil fruit was a phoenix, he was fortunate that the cold hadn't gotten to him during the night. If he had caught a cold, he could already imagine how a certain brother would be teasing him, of all people to be contracting a cold when he's a doctor himself. Lucky that wasn't the case, and remembering Thatch was locked away in the infirmary, perking up his morning already. For once today will be quiet. Looking back down at the unfinished paperwork, he decides to finish it later and get his morning coffee. Getting up, the blonde quickly changes into some warmer clothing. Even though the cold didn't bother him as much as it did a regular person, he wasn't perfectly immune to it. It was times like this that Marco thought that was ironic, since he was a phoenix. But then again, he wasn't actually fire itself. Finished changing, Marco leaves through the door, striding through the corridor of the commander's quarters. His room being one of those at the end, he passes the other rooms, faintly hearing the snores of his fellow crewmates, predicting which ones would be up late with the cold morning. But also notes a couple of rooms, with their doors already open, empty. Marco wasn't surprised, as he wasn't the only early riser, but he did find it strange that the one that had been on night duty had yet to return. He stepped up onto the deck, and soon he found the likely reason why the night watchers had yet to return. On the main deck, havoc had taken place at some point during the snowy night. Clearly the ones on night watch had gotten bored and decided to play in the snow, resulting in what looked like an army of snowmen, or more like a crew, as he recognized some of them resembling their members, some which were impressive, some simple, and some downright annoying. The last being a figure similar to his stature, however his head resembled that of a pineapple with a ridiculous smiley face. His annoyance is soon removed with a swift round kick, leaving the torso pineapple less. With the biggest troublemaker locked up, it was obvious that this craftsmanship was Haruda's. After all, it had been Thatch and Haruda that came up with the joke of comparing him with a fruit originally. Of course it had caught on amongst the crew, but ever since the two took one joke too far, which Marco found himself after one night of heavy drinking, in a tub of pineapple juice, which was followed by Thatch laughing, "Well, you did say you were out of juice," to which Marco responded with forcing the two to drink all the leftover juice, resulting in some unfortunate side effects as punishment for the rest of the day. Well, ever since then, others besides those two were cautious to ever bring up such jokes. Marco enters the galley, which was filled with the members from the night watch. Clearly their activities in the snow over in the night had taken its toll on them, evidenced by their raw red skin and runny noses. Most wrapped themselves in a blanket. Others huddled over a cup of warm soup while the rest just sat closer to the kitchen appreciating the heat it gave off while the cooks were preparing the crew's breakfast. "Morning, Commander," the sous chef greeted him, noticing his presence. "Morning, George. Is there any—" Marco didn't need to finish his question before George pulled out a pot of coffee out of nowhere. Pouring the steaming liquid into a mug, the man then slides the drink across the counter. "Just finished brewing it," George informs. Marco nods. He takes a sip, enjoying the warming taste. Satisfied to finally have his brew in hand, he quickly orders his breakfast. Knowing that his food, just like everyone's, would be brought to his table, he turns to leave. "Ooh." Marco turns back to George, who appeared to want to ask him something. He quirks his head, signaling the cook to continue. "I heard Commander Thatch had been sealed up in the infirmary." "Yeah, so? Well, Doc is still asleep at the moment since he was busy yesterday. So I was wondering if I could borrow your key so we could deliver Commander Thatch's breakfast," he asked. "What happened to the spare?" Marco, knowing the cooks had an extra key for those times Pops decides to adopt a new son. "Well, Commander Thatch said he had lost it a while back." "Of course he did," the blonde grumbles. He notes in the back of his mind to question Thatch about that later and to get Blenheim or one of his men to cut a spare key. "Sure." Marco pulls the key from his jacket pocket, handing it over to George. "Give it back after you guys are done and make sure you lock it when you leave, with him inside." He empathizes on the last word. After all, the cooks were in Thatch's division, so he wouldn't put past that sly fox to abuse his power. "Of course," George assures him. Marco stares him down until he's satisfied, finally leaving for his table. Weaving past the tables, he approaches a table near the back that had been dubbed the commander's table, said table currently being occupied by Haruta, who was accompanied by Izo, Jazu, and Blenheim, which he wasn't too surprised to see since Izo and Jazu were usually early risers. And though Blenheim wasn't one, the shipwright had more than likely spent the night finishing off the ship's repairs. Morning, they greeted, which he returned. He settles down into his seat. Drinking his tea, he listens on the others' conversations. Luffy. It had been many years since he had slept next to anyone. During that time, he had forgotten the feeling of his brother's warmth when they napped together. Instead, it had been replaced with the empty chill that a bear cell can only give off. That is, until now. Being morning, the faint scent of breakfast was enough to rouse the dragon. As he woke, he became aware of the unfamiliar warmth that he snuggled up to. Curious, he slithers up the bed, only to take a peek from beneath the sheets. Seeing Thatch's familiar silhouette, he then remembers climbing into the bed in his half-sleep state. Suddenly, the man shuffles, maneuvering onto his side facing Luffy. However, this movement causes the quilt to slightly recede, revealing the upper half of the dragon's body. Thankfully, the snoring continues, and an immense feeling of relief spreads through Luffy. It wasn't because he was scared of Thatchy. After all, Thatchy is a friend, a good person. Thatchy treats him kindly. But he still remembers his brother's warnings and how people can change when they knowing what they truly were. Some either fearing them or hunting them. A day that Luffy would rather forget was a clear example of that. And though a small part of him argued that Thatchy wasn't like them, he still couldn't allow himself to take that risk. He had just made a friend and he didn't want to lose that. Cautiously and slowly, Luffy allows his body to change back into human form. He sits there now in his bare form. He checks to see if the man is asleep. The pirate must be a real heavy sleeper as to not to be disturbed by the shift, which was lucky for Luffy. Another good thing was that Luffy was now able to finally see his friend's face. Of course, he'd seen the man's face before, but that had always been from a distance. So he takes this chance to lean closer. The boy silently giggles to himself, seeing the way Thatchy slept, his pompadour disheveled. He looks like Grandpa, he thought, comparing the two faces in his mind. They even had a matching scar that curved around their left eye. The memory of his grandpa brought up warm feelings. Is he still looking for me? He hoped his grandpa was all right, though he already knew the elder would certainly berate him right now about being on a pirate ship followed by a fist of love. Luffy rubbing the back of his head. Just the thought of one of those punches already hurt. A whine breaks his reminiscing, Thatch's expression being scrunched up. Luffy wondered about the odd face, but then bed begins to vibrate, the cause Thatchy himself. The man beginning to shiver. Oh, Luffy, being a dragon, had a warmer body than average, so didn't notice temperature too much. Crawling back, the boy carefully lifts the quilt higher till covering his friend's torso fully. Luffy gives a satisfied grin as the shivering stops. Thatchy, comfortable once more, and awkwardly climbs off the bed. Today he was going to continue exploring the ship. With not much to do, it had become his favorite thing to do besides listening to Thatchy's stories. However, with his friend still asleep, that wouldn't be happening, and since he promised Thatchy he'd stop stealing food from the kitchen, he'd have to wait for breakfast. His belly grumbling at that, he'd come back a little later for Thatchy to give him breakfast. So reverts once again to his smaller dragon form and squeezed his rubber body behind the desk of the room, reaching the hidden vent which he had come through yesterday. However, crawling through the vents, he is meet a magical surprise at the other end. His eyes sparkle at the whiteness before him. The deck, roofs, and rails were blanketed with crisp snow. It was truly magic as the ship had transformed into a winter wonderland. Unable to contain his excitement, the dragon dashed into it. White, it's so white. Ace, Sabo, it's snow. Luffy's inner voice exclaimed to his brothers. On his home island, Goa, it hardly snowed, but when it did, his brothers had lots and lots of fun. Snow, I love snow, 'cause it's so white. The little dragon continued to bound along the ship, rolling and swishing in the snow unnoticed, until reaching the main deck, which Luffy stares in awe. So cool, seeing the snow figures, each varying in size. Inspired by the white figures, Luffy rushed around the deck, gathering up some snow into balls, a barrel, coal, and a few sticks. Pushing in the last of the wooden sticks in, he stepped back admiring his handiwork. A plump snowman with 2 wooden arms and a nose, a smiling face, and of course the barrel for a helmet. But something was missing. Luffy blinking as he tilting his head in puzzlement. He ran off, then returning, dragging a piece of fabric behind him. Reaching up around the snowman's neck, he tries to tie the cloth, though it took a few times, not being good at knots. Okay, it's done. Grinning proudly at his new companion, the man that came from the sky, Mr. Snowman, and being a warrior, Mr. Snowman had come down to declare war. However, he was outnumbered. But Mr. Snowman didn't care, staring at the enemy with a smile. Next, snowballs were flying, Luffy growling as the enemy dodged the first few. He missed. However, it wasn't long before opposition's numbers were falling, Luffy silently cheering as one of the snowballs hit a figure straight in the face. Minutes passed till there was one enemy standing, but Mr. Snowman wasn't deterred. Moving behind his snowman, Luffy pulled his arm. Snowman punch, slamming his hand into the back of his snowman, causing one of the arms to shoot out towards the enemy. It missed, whooshing past the snow statue's head across the ship and crashing the galley window, followed by a surprised yelp followed by yells. Oops, frozen, he stared at the door. Marco, a day without incidents, that's all he asked for. Was it too much to ask? Having one of the main troublemakers locked away in the infirmary, he was sure today would be fine, or at least quieter. That wasn't the case. One moment Marco's relaxing with his usual morning tea in hand. The next he's being rammed in the head. At incidences like these that he was thankful his devil fruit allowed things to pass through his body. Hearing the thud as it hit the wall behind him, or this time he probably would have lost an eye. However, everyone around him looked to him in shock and worry as familiar blue flames ignited half of his face, healing the penetrating damage. Marco, you all right? Izo asked. Only after Marco gets over the initial shock does he respond with a curt nod. Sure, we know you heal and all, but I'm fine. Marco reassures Haruta. Even though he said so, Marco still touches the left side of his face, the cool fire licking at his fingers as he did so. The blue flames ebbed away as he's fully healed. Regaining his full sight once more, he's slightly relieved to find that in his moment of surprise that his tea had stayed intact. It wouldn't do him good to accidentally burn himself as well. Marco turns around. Lucky no one was behind him, facing the wall which now has a bruise. Finally, they see the offending object that had fallen to the ground from hitting the wall. A stick. Where'd it come from? Haruta asking the question that was mostly on everyone's mind. I think you'll find that will answer your question, Izo directing, with his fan, everyone across the room to the broken window, which now allowed the winter cold in easily. I just fixed that window, Blenheim grumbles, but the place had been blasted yesterday. It was always impressive how quick Blenheim worked. No matter the job, the shipwright would be there to fix it in a blink of an eye. Furious, they exit the galley. However, what awaited them outside only further shocked and confused everyone. If you had to describe it, it was a snowman's version of hell. Many had been decapitated, bodies deformed from battle, or even no snowman at all but just a pile of white left in its place. Though it looked like a snowman's battleground, and sure they were in the Grand Line so weird things happened, but Marco was sure that snowmen don't just come to life. This wasn't some Frosty the Snowman shit, and even by a slim chance it was. Last he remembered, Frosty didn't go on a killing spree, so there had to a perfectly reasonable explanation. But right now Marco was drawing a blank. At least the ship wasn't damaged. Again, though others didn't see it that way. My snow crew, Haruta exclaimed. A few other members grieving just the same, some even calling out for vengeance for their fallen comrades. I promise I will find out who did this, avenge you. It's just snow, Izo reminds them, finding their reactions over the top. It's unfortunate, but there's no need for the theatrics. It's not just snow, the smaller commander defends. It took us ages to make these. They destroyed them, even the commanders. Fasa is missing an arm. Vista is missing most of his torso, and Marco has even been beheaded. Yeah, shame about that, Marco responds coolly. This is clearly war. I don't think you need to take it that far, Izo comments. Besides, they were gonna end up demolished anyway. Not like they were going to stay standing forever. Jazu comments. At least look on the bright side. Pops is intact. True, but still. Haruta deflates. Exactly. And if anyone has the right to be hunting them down, it should be Blamenko or Blenheim. Marco gestures to the window that the shipwright had already started fixing. It was best to remind them why they were out here in the first place, leaving the destruction of the snowmen aside. They still needed to find the culprit of the shotting stick. Commanders, I believe I found your culprit. A member of the crew waves them over to one corner of the deck. As they do, they notice what the member's standing in front of. Unsurprisingly, it was another snowman. However, this one looked mostly intact except the part where its left arm was supposed to be. The snowman was oddly joyful with its barrel helmet and cape despite its missing arm, it almost appearing completely innocent if it wasn't for the right arm matching with the stick from earlier. Now realizing that the sticks were actually handles broken off from a couple of mops. Geez, now I'm gonna have to add new cleaning equipment to the list, Marco sighs, hoping he didn't find anything else they had to replace. Guess we have our man. Jazu spoke. Well, sort of. At least our snowman. Haruta chuckles. But not a moment later he pales, and it doesn't take Marco long to catch on why. Oh shit, there are a few rules on this ship that you have to follow to live here. And he's not talking about don't attack a family member rule and of those rules. No, he's talking about those silent rules you make to avoid certain death, like one of those being don't touch Izo's stuff. Izo. The nervous Haruta points to the snowman's cape. Isn't that your kimono? There's a pregnant pause as Izo blinks once then twice. Give that back, Izo exclaimed, wrenching the cape off the snowman, effectively beheading it before it started to crumble. Izo cussing that it had been one of those he'd been looking for, not to mention one of his favorites. Hands attempt to untie the sleeve from each other, but fail. What sort of knot is this? Izo screeched. Here, let me. Marco lends out a hand. The geisha passed the kimono over with a frustrated huff. Marco understood now why the other man was having difficulty separating the sleeves from each other. It wasn't even a knot. If you asked him, it looked like something a child would do. It was a mess, almost impossible to untangle. Almost. Fortunately for Izo, though it took a moment, Marco finally finishes unraveling the cloth. He lifts it up to give it a gentle to remove the little snowflakes still clinging to it. Doing so, something off about the fabric catches his eye. From a distance it wasn't noticeable, but up close it almost looked worn. No, that wasn't right. What was the word he was looking for? In his hands the kimono felt thready, loose. If he had to describe it, it was like a kitten needs a blanket before taking its nap. But why would someone need? Marco didn't need to finish that question. Honestly, it's so obvious it's a stupid question. Unless one of his brothers really wanted to piss off Izo, which is way past moronic that even Thatch would dare. There was truly only one reasonable answer, since they currently have only one animal on board. Though it wasn't a small white kitten. Then again, they don't know what it is, but he's sure it isn't that. Maybe the creature had been using it for nesting material or something. It would explain the kimono's condition and possibly where their other missing clothes and blankets were disappearing to. How that just left the question on why it was here, or more precisely around a snowman. Marco, puzzled, could only think that one of his siblings had found the item coincidentally out in the open, or even accidentally found one of its nap areas and had taken it from there, not realizing, and decided to use it as a cape. The notion crossed his mind. He really hoped that wasn't the case, since some animals can be choosy on what they nest with or even territorial with items they have claimed. But if the kimono had been the beast's, at some point he'd be worried that the animal would come looking for it. For a second, Marco debates whether to tell this to his brothers, but decides against it, as he didn't need them worrying about the animal. At least no more than they already are. But still he needed to be cautious. He didn't want another of his brothers in the infirmary. So the problem he faced now was, how's he going to convince Izo to let him keep the cloth? Maybe I could say it's ruined by the snow. I could offer to buy him a new one. However, despite Marco's hidden plan to protect his brother and to redirect the animal's attention away from Izo, he didn't realize it was all for naught. The geisha's fate had already been sealed, as predatory eyes stare down the target from afar, wanting retribution. But not for the stolen fabric, but for the death of Mr. Snowman, after Mr. Snowman was Nakama. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.